Chapter 1294. Chen Wang straightened his expression and said, when the Yu family first entered the capital, there was no doubt that they had the intention of introducing Brother Su to the capital. They also had some plans. For some reason, they did not follow up. In my view, at the last moment, they felt that Brother Su should not come to Great Peace City for now. At the time, I had not entered the diligent department as junior protector and was still sitting in the position of merit examiner of the Ministry of Appointments. I was in my position and said some things to His Highness the Crown Prince. Of course, that was just icing on the cake. If not for Brother Su's own abilities, allowing me to exaggerate, His Highness the Crown Prince would not have any ideas. Su Gong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chen Wang said honestly, Yu Jiankong of Shang Pillar State has his considerations, and I have my own thoughts. The situation is unstable, and I feel that with Brother Su's talent, if not now, when will you come out? Does Brother Su want to miss the spring and autumn war again after missing it once? Let me ask, how many more 20 years and opportunities do Brother Su have to miss? Of course, I also understand Shang Pillar State's cautiousness. They treat Brother Su as a rare commodity and wait for the situation to deteriorate further. Maybe at that critical moment, an assistant minister of the Ministry of War will not be able to send away a hidden dragon general like you. Su Gong nodded and said, I will listen to Junior Protector's words. Chen Wang smiled and said, so this time, Brother Su has been forced to patrol the borders and become the laughingstock of Great Peace City. Don't blame me for drawing legs on a snake. How about I use tea in place of wine and punish myself with 3 cups? Su Gong laughed open-mindedly and said, Brother Chen's words are pretentious. Chen Wang countered, you called me Junior Protector so many times and only called me Brother Chen. You dare to say I am pretentious? Who is the pretentious one? Su Gong, who was as tall as a mountain, said shamelessly, Junior Protector, please forgive me. Chen Wang drank tea. The woman who stood at the door hesitated for a long time but still did not knock. She had turned back to tell her husband that she was going to her maternal home to take some things home. Seeing the warm smile on this man's face, she felt both heartfelt and indescribable guilt. She was happy that her husband was a perfect match that no picky woman could find fault with. She was happy that he finally had a friend whom he could bear heart to drink tea and chat with. As for Princess Changel, she felt guilty that ever since they had been married, she had never known how to share his burdens. Based on her woman's intuition, she could sense his deeply hidden depression. Perhaps it was because being by the Emperor's side for so long was like living with a tiger. Everywhere he went, it was as if he was treading on thin ice. She, as a so-called golden branch and jade leaf, as well as her father's so-called relatives of the imperial family, had always been a restraint to her man, not a help. Chen Wang never drank. Even on the day of their marriage, he did not overdo it. Every day, he would burn the midnight oil and read. He would sleep much later than she did, but he would wake up much earlier than she did. It was as if he always had endless books to read and endless government affairs to deal with. But what was rare was that he never made her feel left out. Although she was not an intelligent woman with exquisite thoughts, she was not stupid. She believed that he truly cared for her and would not flirt outside. Chen Wang's self-respect was unsurpassed in the dozens of manors in Junwang Alley. He cared about her. She loved him very much, but she did not know what to do for him. In the room, the 2 most talented men of the Liang dynasty were drinking weak tea and talking without restraint. She quietly left. Chen Wang asked Su Gong about the trend of the Guangling Road War. Su Gong was deeply worried, and his tone was somewhat heavy. The Ministry of War's earliest estimate was that they would be able to quell the rebellion in half a year. In fact, it was not completely blind optimism. If Yang Xinxing and Yan Jinchuan had not won a great victory at the time, as long as they had held on, then West Chu's revival would have been tantamount to a slow suicide. However, the 2 old generals' defeat facilitated the sharpening of West Chu's new blade. This allowed the two young geniuses, Xia Shibian and Ko Jianghuai, to have enough leeway to grow from battle to battle. The more they fought, the braver they became. Now that West Chu's wings are growing, it will be very difficult to end the war quickly. In addition, the commander-in-chief, Lu Xingxiang, has always been a figurehead. His true enemies are not only West Chu's rebel army, but also the intrigues of the imperial court and the struggle for power within the army. On the other hand, West Chu's side is united as an impregnable fortress. With one side weakening and one side strengthening, this war will be difficult to fight. Fortunately, the imperial court did not push all the blame onto Lu Xingxiang and did not change the commander-in-chief. Otherwise, Chen Wang nodded and said, His Highness the Crown Prince said that he has already mentally prepared himself for the remnants of West Chu's army to attack the capital. Su Gong turned pale with fright and hurriedly looked around. Chen Wang said calmly, Don't worry. Even if these words reach His Highness, nothing will happen to you and I. His Highness still has this bit of magnanimity. Su Gong's emotions were surging. Chen Xiaobao's simple words had revealed too many secrets. On the surface, it was praising Crown Prince Xiao Zhuan for his magnanimity and his negative attitude towards the West Chu war. The deeper meaning was that Chen Wang was sending him a hidden message. His Highness the Crown Prince was a magnanimous heir and worthy of Su Gong's allegiance. If he dug deeper, Su Gong felt a chill run down his spine. The Crown Prince was only supervising the country at a sensitive time. The Emperor was still alive. Was it not too early to persuade or remind an assistant minister of the Ministry of War to take a clear stand? Could it be that there was some kind of mystery behind this? It had to be said that in these years, there had never been any shocking secret information from Great Peace City that the Emperor was unwell. Could it be? Just as Su Gong's mind was in a fierce struggle, Chen Wang seemed to have just said a few casual words and quickly jumped to the next question. Then how long can Beiliang defend? If the northwest gate cannot be defended, how will it be defended next? Su Gong was experienced and ruthless. Chen Wang, who was sitting silently across from him, did not move. His expression did not change at all. He naturally had a plan for this kind of matter. He immediately replied, Under normal circumstances, the Beiliang frontier army can defend for 2 years, but this is based on the premise that neither side makes any major mistakes or plots. In reality, when two armies are facing each other, you can never guess whether the opponent's next move will be stunning or muddle-headed. There are many classic battles in history that were created by a strange combination of factors. Some made the best of the mistakes, and some made the best of the mistakes. Some people lost mysteriously, and some people won in a strange way. Some people won in a strange way, some people won in a strange way, some people won in a strange way, some people won in a strange way. If it was a normal confrontation between two armies, the leader's ability to use soldiers was mediocre. It was just a competition of the resources of both sides. There was no suspense. But in the Great War of Liangmang, it could not be compared like this because both sides had too many famous generals. Su Gong was slightly fascinated and a dazed look appeared in his eyes. Beiliang had Chu Lushan, Yuan Zuozong, Yan Wenwan, Qin Yinchue, He Zhonghu. Which one of them was not a general who had been exposed to the smoke of battle and could take charge of an area? Bei Mang had Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Zhuo, Lu Gue, Huang Songpu, Yang Yuanzan. Su Gong sighed and said, Almost everyone can cause unpredictable changes to the entire battle situation. Chapter 1295. Su Gong gradually entered a good mood. Once he started talking, he could not stop. He held a cup in one hand but did not drink the tea. He raised the other hand and pointed in the air. Before Beiliang was absorbed into Liang territory, there were two paths for the northern nomads to invade south. One was to use Beiliang, which was at the head of the Central Plains, as the first choice. The army occupied the high ground and was usually unstoppable. The disadvantage was that the battle line was slightly longer. Even if they fought all the way to Xiangfan, which was at the middle of the Central Plains, it would be difficult to advance any further. Often, they could only retreat. The second was to go south through the gaps at the border of Ji province and send cavalry to search in batches to clear out the scattered obstacles outside the pass. On one hand, they would cover the army, and on the other, they would pillage villages and force the Central Plains dynasties to retreat to their strongholds. Right now, the Northern Mang seems to have chosen an unwise path, but in fact, choosing short-term troubles and abandoning long-term considerations is a method they have no other choice. The Northern barbarians are determined to attack our dynasty, and there is no better plan to speak of. There are only two options to choose from. The Northern Mang can't afford to drag it out, but our dynasty can afford to drag it out. If we wait until the Guangling Path and West Chu are destroyed before the Northern Mang starts the war, then we really won't be able to fight. A Central Plains with a stable interior and a Central Plains imperial court that was eager to make progress was undoubtedly the nightmare of the nomads in the north. If Beimang attacks their western front first, which is the two Liao defense lines that our court built with half of our dynasty's national strength, outsiders may think that this line is closest to Graydon City and that Beimang should use their troops this way. However, the truth is that Beimang will not be able to go south at that time because Beiliang's 300,000 border army will definitely respond to the two Liao on the eastern front and initiate an attack on Beimang's southern court. Once the Beiliang cavalry wantonly enters the heartland and enters the grasslands, even if the Beimang army is lucky enough to advance all the way to Graydon City, they will not be able to return. Not only will the southern court be gone, but even the northern court will be destroyed. Since Beimang has chosen the stubborn Beiliang as their breakthrough point, let's take a step back and say that if Beimang really manages to defeat Beiliang, it is not yet time to take a breather because there will be two fierce battles soon to be fought. The most fatal thing is that these two battles are happening at the same time. Beimang, whose strength has been greatly damaged, has no choice but to fight on two fronts. Western Shu has Chen Jibao holding the fort, and the eastern front has General Gu Jiantang leading the army. In front of Beimang, they are not soft persimmons. If we take another step back, Chen Jibao is unable to contain Beimang, and Gu Jiantang's supposedly impregnable eastern front is completely destroyed. So what? Graydon City will be given to Beimang. Our dynasty still has the strength to fight. At this point, Su Gong's hand suddenly pulled from north to south. We can retreat to the south of Guangling River in one go. Don't forget that we still have Zhao Bing's battle-hardened army. With Zhao Bing's army as the core fighting force, His Majesty can easily gather an army of 500,000. It is not a difficult matter. Su Gong suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly. Speaking of which, Beimang can really force us to this point. They are quite capable. If they win the world in the end, Su Gong will accept it wholeheartedly. The worst that can happen is that we die in battle. Chen Wang said softly, there is a prerequisite to all of this. Su Gong was silent for a moment and then nodded. The prerequisite is that Beiliang is willing to fight to the death. Chen Wang muttered to himself, I know that person is willing. Su Gong grunted. There is no other way. He is Su Zhao's son. Anyone can retreat, but not him. Chen Wang smiled slightly and said, it is very difficult for me to connect the young master who spent money to buy poems from me to the king of Beiliang who dares to fight when he says he wants to. Su Gong didn't know how to respond. Chen Wang muttered, the snowflakes in Beiliang are as large as a banquet. Thinking about it, if Graydon City is already so snowy, my hometown will be even colder. Su Gong felt some admiration for this scholar who was more than a decade younger than him. A young man from Beiliang who entered the capital to take the Jinshi exam and passed. In the capital's officialdom, he had never said a single bad word about Beiliang. He had also never concealed his little relationship with the then heir of Beiliang. Even so, he was still in the emperor's heart and walked step by step to a high position. He even had the hope of reaching the top and fighting for the position of future leader of the civil officials. Su Gong didn't dare believe this story and didn't expect Chen Wang to tell it of his own accord. Even if Chen Wang was willing to tell it, Su Gong wouldn't dare listen, no matter how bold he was. Unless, one day, Chen Wang really did remove the prefix of Prime Minister and became a second Zhang Julu, and Su Gong also needed to become a second Gu Jiantang of the Liang dynasty. The conversation between the two was like drinking tea. It was 70 to 80% enjoyable, but there was still a lingering aftertaste. If they continued talking, they would probably feel disgusted. Su Gong stood up and bid farewell. Chen Wang also stood up to see him off. He walked him all the way to the door and said with a smile, "Brother Su will be heading to the northern front tomorrow. I have to be on time to go to the diligent room, so I won't see you off." Su Gong nodded. "No matter. You and I will have plenty of opportunities to meet in the future." Su Gong sat in the inconspicuous carriage and slowly left in the wind and snow. The tracks left behind by the wheels were quickly covered by the goose feather snow. Chen Wang turned around and stepped onto the steps. He looked up at the night sky and suddenly ordered the old gatekeeper, "Old Song, prepare the carriage. I want to go enjoy the snow. Also, remember to send someone to inform her." The old man was surprised. Night ban. Like Su Gong, Chen Wang didn't have time to take off his official robes and court robes. He smiled and said, "Just leave the city without changing." The old man immediately felt proud. He smiled knowingly and said, "This old servant will go right away." A short while later, a carriage came out of the southern city gates and stopped at a small crossing. Chen Wang walked down from the carriage. For some reason, he was standing at the crossing to the south, but his gaze was looking to the west. Chen Wang took out the small item he always carried with him and sniffed it lightly. When he was young, he had read an old saying, 3 lives of good karma, in this life, one can smell the fragrance of Nanmu. In his hand was a piece of Nanmu worth 10,000 gold. At that time, he was just a poor youth who had studied hard for 10 years and still had an uncertain future. He would often sit at the shady crossing covered in reeds and read. She would often listen to him while she worked on her clothes. He said that after he became famous in the imperial examinations, he would definitely return home in glory. He would definitely bring her some of this Nanmu incense. Also, he would definitely marry her. Then, he traveled thousands of li to this great peace city, the most virtuous city in the world. He successfully jumped the Dragon's Gate in the imperial examinations of thousands of soldiers and horses. But in the end, he married. Lifting the red veil, that beautiful face in the candlelight. Not her. He only sent the 4 words, "Don't think about me, don't wait." After so many years, the person he was most afraid of was not the emperor whose heart was unpredictable, or the crown prince who hid his sharpness, or the omnipresent Zhao Go. He was most afraid that he would talk in his sleep, afraid that he would call out her name. He was even more afraid that the path he had chosen in his hot-bloodedness would implicate the graceful woman far away in Beiliang. She had once told him with a red face that if they married in the future, he would not be allowed to do farm labor. Why? Because he was a scholar. Chen Wang gripped the piece of Nanmu tightly. His lips trembled as he closed his eyes. The heavy snow in the middle of winter covered his shoulders. Also, he did not pay attention to the falling snow. Chen Wang. Wang, the name of the full moon. The sun was in the east, the moon in the west, looking at each other from a distance. This worthy young prime minister slowly opened his eyes and said softly, "Have you found a good family? Even if you haven't, don't wait anymore. If you marry, you should find a scholar who knows how to cherish you more than me. You must hate me, this heartless person, right?" Chen Wang's face was filled with tears. What he didn't know was that Wataguchi Yoshihiko was still waiting for him. But he used to be standing at the ferry, but now he was lying in the reeds, waiting forever. The dead do not complain, but those who have not returned do not know. Chapter 1296. The Spring Snow Building, known as the small temple in the southeast of Liang, was built on Lion's Cliff. The Spring Snow Building was located in the slender Green Mountain Village, which was formerly a summer resort of the Dechu dynasty. It was destroyed by the fires of the Spring and Autumn War. After Guangling Wang Zhao-yi spared no effort in expanding it, he collected countless famous flowers and rare stones and raised them in his boudoir. Among them was a huge rock from the Spring God Lake that was carried to the village by the Guangling Navy and the vassal king's cavalry. It was shaped like a pearl and was worthy of being called the most famous stone in the world. It was also a treasure that contained feng shui. The slender Green Mountain Village faced the Guangling River to the south. In the Lion's Cliff area, scholars from Jiangnan often climbed high to write poems. After it became the vassal king's exclusive residence of the emperor's younger brother, Zhao Yi, only the Guangling Path had the right to enter the Spring Snow Building to discuss politics. It was a special benefit for a small group of influential people. Lion's Cliff was also known as the Treasure Trove Mountain. In the last years of the Defeng dynasty, there was a saying that an enlightened monk subdued a lion here. It attracted the magnificent phenomenon of flowers falling from the sky like rain. From the last years of the Defeng dynasty to the first year of the Yonghui dynasty, every time there was a war, these ownerless stones were constantly picked up by travelers, wanderers, and quarrymen until less than a tenth remained and entered the homes of the common people. After Zhao Yi was made a vassal, he either took it by force or bought it at a high price. The huge rocks surrounding the Spring God Lake were scattered around randomly and gradually covered Lion's Cliff. On the cliff was the Spring Snow Building. There was a well downstairs. The first light snow in Jiangnan arrived slowly and then suddenly disappeared. However, the fires of war in the Guangling Path were really frightening. Whether it snowed or not, the size of the snowfall did not matter. The winter snow melted and it was noon. The scenery on Lion's Cliff was beautiful and gentle. A fat man sat alone at the mouth of the well below the building. This small well had always been dry and it was unknown why it was dug. It had been a mystery since ancient times. The fat man was wearing a bright yellow python robe embroidered with gold. Among the vassal kings of Liang, only this fat pig had such an honor. Even the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, who had no merit in the past, only had a large blue satin python robe. The king of Yanqi, Zhao Bing, was inferior to this fat pig in terms of dragon poise and python water. As for the more substantial vassal lands, the southern border, which was full of miasma all year round, naturally couldn't be compared to Guangling, where half of the world's taxes came from. The Liang court had always had bad comments about Guangling king, who was the most suspected of receiving rewards without merit. The number of imperial censors and imperial censors who died directly or indirectly at the hands of Guangling king was even more shocking. Now that he had finally received his retribution, the fat man, who was being roasted on the bonfire, did not seem to be as panicked and lost as the outside world imagined. Instead, he sat quietly at the mouth of the well without any hostility or dejection. Whenever Zhao Yi sat in a daze in the well, even the trusted aides of the Spring Snow Building did not dare disturb him. In the distance, His Royal Highness, Zhao Yuang, stood respectfully. The main general of the Western Front, Song Li, who had just returned from the front lines, stood shoulder to shoulder with him. On the Guangling River outside the cliff, there were densely packed Navy warships. Although it was said that half of the Guangling Navy had been taken away by West Chu, that was only a loss in numbers. Most of the ships were firmly in the hands of the Guangling army. Zhao Yuang and Song Li had a close relationship and had called each other brothers for many years. Everyone knew that in Guangling, only by becoming Song Li's woman could one truly escape the clutches of His Royal Highness. Otherwise, even if one had a provincial governor as a father, they could not be considered a life-saving talisman. At this time, Xiao Yuang lowered his voice and said angrily, "Back then, it was said that the Grand Tutor of West Chu had fled here and was unwilling to accept the summons of the Su family's iron cavalry. He carried the fallen princess and resolutely jumped off the cliff to meet his death." Nonsense. Lame Su clearly tricked the court. Su Xiao should be given an even more disgusting title. Song Li smiled and did not agree. He turned his head and glanced at the roiling river flowing east. After the fall of Chu, there was no spring and autumn. After the high cliff, there was no central plains. When De Chu was destroyed, there were still southern Tang and western Shu that stubbornly resisted. However, there was already such a saying in the literary world. Xiao Yuang yawned and his mind wandered. Suddenly, Song Li bumped into his arm. Only then did Xiao Yuang realize that his father was waving at them. Xiao Yuang hurried forward and walked with Song Li to the side of the well. Xiao Yi looked at Song Li and asked with a smile, "Then Ko Jianghuai really resigned and went into seclusion?" Song Li nodded and said, "At the beginning, this general also thought that it was Chao Zhangqing's smokescreen. Now, it seems that Ko Jianghuai's abrupt abdication of responsibility should not be far from the truth." Xiao Yi gave Song Li an encouraging look. Song Li thought for a moment before continuing. The situation on the Western Front was already in tatters. If Ko Jianghuai continues to expand his military achievements, at least half of Prince's tens of thousands of cavalry will have to be lost if we want to stop Ko Jianghuai's advance. Putting aside the fact that Ko Jianghuai's departure was rumored to be because he did not agree with Chao Changqing's political views, or that there were people in West Chu's court who did not want him to be too powerful and thus made things difficult for him. In any case, it is definitely a good thing for Prince. Before spring, there won't be any major movements on the Western Front. Chao Changqing agreeing to Ko Jianghuai's departure was very unreasonable. Perhaps in the future, historians will evaluate this matter and see it as an important turning point. Chapter 1297. The unusually large Xiao Yi grunted in acknowledgement. He bent down with some difficulty to pick up a stone and held it in his palm. He felt the coolness of the stone and asked, "Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about the present. Song Li, do you think Chao Changqing will lead the army personally or let Xie Shibian fill in for Ko Jianghuai? No matter who is in charge of the Western Front, it doesn't seem to be good news." Song Li said without hesitation, "It's more likely that Xie Shibian will lead the army. Chao Changqing will most likely retreat behind the scenes to strategize." Xiao Yi said self-deprecatingly, "That's right. Why would Chao Changqing care about this king and Lu Xingxiang? He only has eyes for Gu Jiantang. As long as Gu Jiantang doesn't go south from the Liao border, Chao Changqing won't appear to take charge." Song Li nodded and said, "It seems conceited, but it's also a long-term consideration. Chao Changqing is too conspicuous. He can only give Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai enough opportunities to grow if he doesn't interfere with the specific deployment of troops." Xiao Yi suddenly laughed and said, "There are no heroes in the world. Only the villains can become famous." Xiao Yi was a little confused. He knew that the so-called villains were people like Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai, but he didn't know who his father's so-called heroes were. Xiao Yi sighed and said, "Back then, Lame Su only needed to lightly kick to sink the land of Shenzhou." Xiao Yi's face was full of sarcasm. "This time, vassal King Jingnan is very loud. Let's not talk about small raindrops. There's no such thing. Other than that old fool Zhao Bing's son who has ulterior motives, the rest are a bunch of good-for-nothings. If Lame Su hadn't died, he could have casually pulled out 50,000 elite cavalry from Beiliang and Chao Changqing and his West Chu wouldn't have been able to do anything. As for Zhao Heng, if he was willing to give his all and join forces with this king, they would also be able to solve this problem. However, Zhao Bing was just as scheming as Zhao Heng, who was ridiculed by Su Xiao as a woman. However, Zhao Heng was a far cry from Zhao Bing's ability to feign ignorance. Before Chao Chongqing and the little girl had raised the flag, they had purposefully sent 3 urgent memorials to Great Peace City saying that the South was in chaos. Hadn't they sent a letter of apology not long ago? He said that the 16 clans of the southern barbarian colluded with the remnants of the West Chu, which led to 3 consecutive defeats on the front line that he personally led, losing several tens of thousands of men and horses. Tens of thousands. F***ck your mother. Hundreds of people, right? Your son, who was only a teenager, could go to the hinterland of southern barbarian to chop people's heads and build a capital. Xiao Bing, when you went, you were defeated, and you lost 3 times. What did Nalan Yusi, who claimed to be able to break a city with a flick of his finger and destroy a country with a wave of his sleeve, do? A big man, he couldn't have gotten pregnant because of you, Xiao Bing, right? Zhao Yi sighed. Among all the kings, the old king of Jing'an, Xiao Heng, who couldn't recover from the setback, had the most grievances and the greatest limitations. The king of Huainan, Xiao Ying, had the most talent but the least ability. The king of Jiaodong, Xiao Sui, had the softest temper and the least temperament from beginning to end. As for this king, he had the smallest vision and couldn't compete for the title of the best cavalry in the world. He was satisfied with the title of the best navy in the world. He had the smallest ambition and never coveted the throne. He had been like this since he was a child. He even went to lame Su and almost knelt down in front of him so that my brother could sit on the throne. So in these years, outsiders said that this king had a fierce reputation and Su Shao, the king of Beiliang, was the awe-inspiring one. If we were to talk about who this prince loathes the most, it would be Xiao Bing. He changes his rudder when the wind blows, burns the bridge after crossing the river, and is a master of honeyed words and swords. It's a pity that Imperial Brother has always been wholeheartedly guarding against the Northwest. No matter how this prince, his biological younger brother of the same father and mother, tries to persuade him, he still refuses to make a move against the southern border. Zhao Yi smiled sadly and looked up at his son, Zhao Yuang, and said self-mockingly, that year when Su Fingnian came to Guangling River, you had a deadly feud with him. This king deliberately showed weakness to Su Shao and cut a piece of meat from you and sent it to Beiliang. Then at this time, he sent a secret letter to my brother. It wasn't to say anything bad about Su Shao and Beiliang, but to say that Zhao Bing couldn't be allowed to accumulate power. As a result, my brother still didn't care. If cutting off a few pounds of meat from this king could change my brother's mind, this king would really do it. Since my brother didn't want to be the bad guy, then this king would do it. So in this half a year, this king had people secretly assassinate the crown prince of Yan Qi 4 times, but they all returned without success. Song Li was silent. Zhao Yuang, hearing this for the first time, opened his mouth wide in shock. Zhao Yi threw out the stone that was still warm in his palm. Later, when Chen Jibao entered the capital to take up the post of Minister of War, this king knew that this person would definitely be given the title of king. So, he sent a secret letter to my brother, proposing that Chen Jibao be given the territory between Guangling Road and Nanjiang Road. If Chen Jibao felt that the territory was too small, this king could even give up one more province. The two of you know what the result was. Zhao Yi laughed and said, Piao, father just wants you to inherit the throne. I don't even hope that my grandson will become a Qin Wang. In the future, he will definitely go to Great Peace City to be a prince of pleasure. But Zhao Bing will be much more domineering as a father. Then Zhao Yi exhaled deeply and waved his hand tiredly. Zhao Yuang and Song Li, who had been silent all this time, retreated. Zhao Yi continued to sit at the mouth of the well, looking at the sky. He was like a fool looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. Chapter 1298. The battlefield was like a melting pot, crushing anything that had anything to do with self-righteousness. In the Beiliang frontier army, apart from a few high-ranking officers who knew how to use weapons other than the standard, such as Ningame's halberds and Li Mofan's mobile arsenal that could not be viewed with common sense, there were also a few who had their own lances. Other than that, almost all of the border army soldiers did not carry anything that seemed heavy or ingenious. As for the battle between cavalry, it was definitely not like what many people imagined. After charging into each other, they would slow down their horses and attack each other. This kind of unsightly scene could make even the most experienced cavalry collapse. It was truly a waste of precious cavalry to treat them like foot soldiers. In reality, it was like the two weapons of Jianghu people sparring, dispersing upon contact and then searching for the next opportunity. If the Longxiang army, with 3,000 cavalry chasing 7,000 Chang cavalry, did not achieve any results in the previous charge against Kuyi's Chang cavalry, after stretching out a distance, Wang Lingbao would turn his head to observe the enemy cavalry's movements and decide whether to directly stop and turn around or slowly circle around to launch a second round of attacks. If there were still no clear signs of victory or defeat in the second round of collisions, Wang Lingbao would have to use the casualties on his side to choose which unit should give up the heavy spears and switch to the lighter cold blades, and which unit should continue to use the spears or the light crossbows. On the battlefield of a stalemate, a small advantage could increase one's advantage, but a single flaw was enough to bury the entire army. From great general Su Shao to General Chen Jibao, the two people who had left the deepest imprint on the Beiliang cavalry both believed in one thing. The true strength of the Su family cavalry was that they had enough patience and strength to wait for the enemy to take the initiative to make a mistake. Encountering such an invulnerable enemy, the Chang cavalry undoubtedly had 8 lifetimes of bad luck. The Chang cavalry originally thought that they were wolves in a flock of sheep. Not only could they eat their fill in Liuzhou, they could even go to the rich central plains and pillage. All of the cavalry had heard year after year of people talking about the beauty of the central plains. There were countless fields and mountains of shining silver. Moreover, the women there were of all shapes and sizes. Most importantly, their skin was much better than the women on the grasslands who were exposed to the sun and wind. To the touch, it was like touching fine silk. But in reality, before the sky turned dark, the beautiful dream was shattered. The 3,000 dragon elephant cavalry killed them like stray dogs. If not for the Chang cavalry's unique speed, in this kind of retreat, under the dragon elephant cavalry's pursuit, they would not even last an hour. The cold crossbows that had been hidden away during the previous charge were finally starting to show their terrifying killing power. For the sake of pursuing the greatest speed, the Chang cavalry even took the initiative to abandon the spears and lances they were unfamiliar with. As for the armor they wore, it was only the standard issue for Northern Mang's ordinary light cavalry. Compared to the light but sturdy and expensive armor of the Southern Dynasty's great generals, the difference was too great. One must know that the crossbows were a freak that successfully combined the strengths of the Qin crossbows and Feng crossbows. They were easy to assemble and disassemble. After 2 generations of Beiliang craftsmen improving the bows, the various Zhongliang crossbows had a close to perfect balance. Other than firing speed, the range, penetrative power, and accuracy of the large crossbows were better than the longbows. In the countless battles between the dynasties of the Central Plains and the nomads of the north, the foot crossbows and ballistae could be used to great effect. As a result, some people said that for thousands of years, the Central Plains had used 2 things to block the horse hooves of the nomads. The first was the majestic cities and the second was the crossbows. Amongst which, if Beiliang, who could be said to be second in the use of crossbows, no one would dare to say they were first. The Northern Mang and the Southern dynasties couldn't be more familiar with Northern Liang's short crossbows. It could even be said that they loathed them deeply. The great king of the southern courtyard, Huang Songpu, had once worked hard to promote similar short crossbows on a large scale. However, due to various complicated reasons, he was obstructed by many sides, and the results were minimal. The dragon elephant cavalry with the best riding skills were in charge of stopping the Chang cavalry and slowing them down. As long as they caused damage, they didn't care about the life and death of the Chang cavalry. Even if a Chang cavalry fell off their horse, they wouldn't take a second look at the military merit that was within their reach. Everything was left to the comrades behind who didn't have a crossbow to stab and kill with a spear. With such a clear division of labor, it was naturally really vicious and bloody. To these haggard Chang cavalry, the silver lining was that the teen who tossed the black tiger around for fun. After the initial round of killing, he got back on his horse and stopped killing. It wasn't that the Chang cavalry didn't think about fleeing in all directions like birds and beasts to avoid being chased down by the dragon elephant cavalry. However, as soon as this thought appeared, the dragon elephant cavalry, under the command of that tall and sturdy man, immediately had a way to deal with it. Apart from the dragon elephant cavalry and crossbow cavalry that were tangling with the Chang cavalry, the 2,000 dragon elephant spear cavalry quickly spread out, and then suddenly charged forward, all of them raising their crossbows, almost forming a pocket formation with the crossbow cavalry in front of them. When the Chang cavalry gave up on this idea and continued to crazily retreat towards the north, those dragon elephant cavalry gradually slowed down, resting on the backs of their horses. This kind of combat strength was even more hidden than crossbow attacks, making the Chang cavalry feel their scalps go numb and a chill run down their spines. Chapter 1299. The nomads in the north were born to live on horseback. Because they were born with hardships, they had no choice but to fight bravely. However, the vast land also nurtured the unruly nature of the grassland knights that went deep into their bones. They could be brave and fearless and launch a wild charge at lightning speed. However, their messy front line was not worth mentioning in the eyes of the Central Plains military experts. Their valiant attitude of roaring and waving their blades, and even lifting their butts off the back of the horse, was an edge that had to be polished off in the strict Beiliang frontier army. The Beiliang cavalry valued unity the most and did not worship heroes who fought alone. Huang Songpu, Lu Gui, and Yang Yuanzhan were able to stand out in Beimang because they preserved the advantages of Beimang and learned the essence of the Central Plains art of war while suppressing the weaknesses of the Beimang. Today, the 3,000 dragon elephant cavalry were the teachers, and the Chang cavalry were the students. The teachers taught the students this principle. Unfortunately, the school fees were too expensive and had to be exchanged with their lives. Wang Lingbao calculated the speed of the Chang cavalry's retreat, the geography of the southern dynasty's border, the distribution of troops, and the speed of the other two dragon elephant cavalry's reinforcements. He was considering whether or not he should just kill his way into Gusai Prefecture and sneak behind Lu Gui and stab this southern dynasty generals but with his iron spear. In the Beiliang frontier army, no one cared much about the old southern courtyard king Huang Songpu or Yang Yuanzhan. Only Lu Gui was someone that everyone wanted to behead. The reason was simple. The northern barbarians kept saying that Lu Gui can be half a Su Shao. Wang Lingbao could not tolerate it. The entire Beiliang frontier army could not tolerate it. As a fierce general who had experienced hundreds of battles at the border, Wang Lingbao naturally had his own thoughts. His two thoughts were not selfish. One was to kill Lu Gui, and the other was to use his own dragon elephant cavalry to fight a great battle against the two kings' heavy cavalry. In the soul-stirring history of war, there had never been a true battle between light cavalry and heavy cavalry. Even Liang Mang, who produced a lot of warhorses and had excellent horse management, used light cavalry more often in their 20 years of confrontation. They had enough mobility to launch surprise attacks and pursue. On the border of Liangmang, where blood was destined to flow for thousands of miles in the future, both sides had the best warhorses, the sharpest warblades, the bravest cavalry, and the most spacious and flat battlefield. Perhaps one day, the first battle between heavy cavalry and heavy cavalry in the history of war would erupt. Among the Beiliang cavalry, besides the Great Snow Dragon cavalry, there were close to 6,000 heavy cavalry from the old Long Xiong army. Meanwhile, the Great Snow Dragon riders were Beiliang's most crucial asset and wouldn't be easily mobilized. As a result, Wang Lingbao firmly believed that he had a high chance of letting the entire world see what a battle of heavy cavalry was like. For the next 100 or 1,000 years, there would be people who would never forget about this. No one would forget that there was an army called the Beiliang Cavalry. Wang Lingbao never had any sense of righteousness for the country or the people. As for Beiliang defending the northwest to the death, they were schemed against by the Liang imperial court and treated as heartless barbarians by the people of the Central Plains. Did he not have any resentment? He did, and it was a great deal. However, the history books could forget about Wang Lingbao, a small figure who died, but they could not forget the general's life's work, the Beiliang army. Wang Lingbao suddenly saw the commander wave at him. He quickly rode forward, and Su Longxiang calmly said, "Lead the troops and chase for 30 miles. Kill as many as you can, and then return to Qingsang City." Although Wang Lingbao was full of doubts, he still didn't have any doubts. Then, this deputy general of the Longxiang army saw the youth reveal a rare savage smile. He jumped onto the black tiger and charged north, directly leaping over a large group of Chang cavalry and heading north alone. Could it be that there was a big fish ahead of him? Wang Lingbao naturally wanted more military merits. It would be even better if he could go to Gusai province and show off. However, he wasn't a brute who didn't know the importance of things. The military merits of all 8,000 Chang cavalry added together couldn't compare to Su Longxiang. Someone who could move the heart of the young commander was definitely not a small fry. Wang Lingbao immediately made a decision. After calling over a few captains, he ordered in a deep voice, "Within 30 miles, kill all the Chang cavalry. If you miss a few, you will have their merits deducted. If your merits aren't enough, what will happen to you? According to the old rules of the Longxiang army, you know better than me what will happen. In this 30-mile journey, you are allowed to kill as much as you want." The sun was setting in the west. More than 100 li north of the youth on the black tiger, two people didn't ride horses. They were flying through the air, heading south. The middle-aged swordsman wore the number 1 sword of the Beimang dynasty, the calm disturbance. He was as graceful as a sword immortal. The person next to him was astonishingly tall. He was twice as tall as the Jiangnan girl. His entire body was golden, and his face was solemn. He was like a divine general of the heavenly court who had descended into the mortal world. Another 100 li behind them, a rider was galloping. The rider wore a black bamboo hat and was shrouded in a wide black robe. He seemed to be afraid of sunlight. His fingers holding the reins were constantly trembling. It wasn't just his fingers and arms that were trembling. His entire body was trembling. Even his lips and teeth were no exception. This was the price one had to pay to reincarnate in someone else's body. It was precisely because he had paid such a painful price that he was able to linger on at death's door. He wanted the Su brothers to die more than anyone else, and he wanted them to die even more miserably than him. He truly had died, and someone had torn him apart while he was still alive. But planting a willow would produce shade. He was a willow. He had relied on a long-lost secret art of the Qin dynasty to come back from the dead. Chapter 1300. As the sun set in the west, it was like an old man past his prime. Unable to bear the silence any longer, large clouds of fire gathered in the western sky, burning brilliantly. As the saying goes, one can't go out early, but one can travel 1,000 miles late. Then there would definitely be people who wouldn't have the chance to go on a long journey tomorrow. The sunlight shone so brightly that the green-clothed swordsman in the desert seemed to be wearing a golden armor. The middle-aged swordsman walked a few feet above the 1,000 miles of yellow sand and looked up at the rosy clouds in the west. His left thumb pressed on the sword hilt, and the ancient sword in the scabbard was about to come out. Originally, with his lofty character, he wouldn't join hands with others to target someone. However, he was in the sect and had no choice. Since it was the Empress and the Taiping Commandant's instructions, he could only act against his will. According to the signs revealed by the hibernation vat in Shijing, Su Longxiang should be nearby. However, it would take a bit of luck to meet and kill him. After all, it was not easy to find a cavalry of 10,000 people in the thousands of miles of yellow sand at the border, let alone one person. It was tantamount to finding a needle in a haystack. If Su Longxiang had reached the celestial state, where he could resonate with heaven and earth, Wang Qing could barely reach the celestial state. However, according to the spies of the spider web, this young man who was born in the Vajra realm eventually stayed at the threshold of the finger mystery realm. He didn't choose to break through the realm like a hot knife through butter. Wang Qing suddenly stopped. His feet gently landed on the sand, and his thumb pressed harder on the sword hilt. In an instant, 6 or 7 wisps of sword chi lingered around the calm storm scabbard. In the chess and sword music school, the Bronze Man Grandmaster, who was 1 generation higher than the Taiping Commandant, also stopped. His expression was as calm as an ancient well. Huang Qing looked forward and smiled softly. Grandmaster, why don't you leave this task to me? The head of sword chi did not even reach the shoulder of the golden giant. The martial arts grandmaster who rarely showed up in Beimang nodded and said calmly, "You can go first." The meaning of the grandmaster's words was very clear. In his opinion, sword chi might not be able to take down Su Longxiang. Huang Qing dismissed it with a smile and did not complain. He was extremely respectful to this grandmaster, not only because of the difference in seniority, but also because of the grandmaster's path of proving Tao. This Grand Master and Wang Xianji were like the same year, in terms of textual research. Compared to the martial god of Beimang, to Oba Bodhisattva, and Xianyuan Pan in the Liyang realm, they had tested the feasibility of opening the heaven's gate on their own. The saints of the 3 sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism had proven Tao and immortality by borrowing the gate of heaven and earth. However, the Grand Master of Bronze Man and the others had directly chosen to break the gate and enter. The reason why Li Chungang, who had already passed away, was known as the first person after ancestor Lu was because this sword god was even rarer. He strived to use the sword in his hand to build his own heaven's gate. Li Chuangang's sword Dao was unique and was close to the heavenly Dao. This was the competition of the path under each person's feet. It had nothing to do with the ranking of the martial arts evaluation. However, if Wang Xianji was once the whetstone of the Liyang Jianghu, then the Grand Master of Bronze Man beside Huang Qing was another whetstone of the Beimang Jianghu. From Tuoba Bodhisattva, to Murong Baoding and the 5th Raccoon, to Hong Jingyan, without exception, they had all exchanged pointers with the Grand Master of Bronze Man. Unlike the old monster Wang of the martial emperor's city who had a perfect record of winning hundreds of battles in 60 years, the Grand Master of Bronze Man did not have such a terrifying number of battles. He also did not have the shocking rumor of crushing any top experts. However, no matter who he faced, he was undefeated. He only hoped to not lose and not win. The imperial decree of peace once said that the Grand Master of Bronze Man only needed to be undefeated when he fought with others. It was only necessary to win the final battle with the heavenly Tao. The Grand Master of Bronze Man reminded softly, this person once broke Murong Baoding's invincible Vajra in the Qingsang city. You should be careful. It's best if you don't engage in close combat. Huang Qing's aura was already rising, and his sword intent was overflowing. He slowly pulled his sword out of the scabbard by 2 inches and acknowledged. He then smiled and said, Grand Master, Huang Qing will take his leave first. The Grand Master of Bronze Man nodded his head and said, I will keep an eye on that child who doesn't know his place first. Huang Qing gently let out a breath and skimmed towards the south. The wisps of sword aura outside the scabbard gradually became as thick as a green rainbow as Huang Qing sprinted. The sword aura was close. It was a magnificent sight. The steed heading south didn't slow down after seeing the golden giant and rushed to the side of the Grand Master of Bronze Man. He originally wanted to brush past the Grand Master of Bronze Man in a spurt of energy. However, the warhorse suddenly stopped as if it had crashed into an invisible wall and even retreated a few steps. Wearing a conical bamboo hat and a black robe, One Section Willow reached out his hand and touched the mane of his mount. He finally managed to pacify the Fergana-treasured colt that was feeling extremely restless. His hand was deathly pale like snow without any color of blood, and the meridians under his skin were clearly visible. One Section Willow, who was once the chief assassin of the spiderweb, was obviously displeased. Is there a need to be so cautious? In front of the sword aura that is close, there is no bullshit Vajra realm in the world. Even if there is, it would be Li Xiaoxin of the two Zen temples. The tall and sturdy giant crossed his arms over his chest with an indifferent expression. One Section Willow suddenly bent over and laughed like a madman. He pointed at the Grand Master of Bronze Man. I was wrong. I actually forgot about you who was close at hand. In the past, the Spear Immortal King came to Beimang to practice his spear. In the end, he was blocked by you with his bare hands. The Grand Master of Bronze Man shot a glance at this pitiful worm who should have had a bright future but ended up in a life worse than death. He didn't conceal the pity in his eyes. An illegitimate child who couldn't see the light of day, others would be somewhat afraid of him. Why would he need to care? Even if One Section Willow's father was standing here, it was nothing. Li Mibi, the creator of the spiderweb, Beimang's #1 spy, and a man who was said to be able to sit on Her Majesty's couch to discuss matters. So what? One Section Willow's face was gloomy. The Grand Master of Bronze Man, who was always serious in speech and manner at the chess and sword music school, sneered for the first time. I've seen many stunning young people in my life. They all thought that the whole world should revolve around them. They never talked about retreating when doing things. In the end, without exception, they all died very early, and the way they died was quite miserable. One Section Willow sneered. Then isn't Su Fingnian living well? The Grand Master of Bronze Man laughed out loud for the first time. His laughter was like thunder, shaking the heavens. Are you worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as him? One Section Willow seemed to have gone mad. He lowered his head and bit a finger. I'm not worthy. I, Li Fingshou, entered King Kong at the age of 14. At the age of 20, I entered Finger Profound Realm. At the age of 22, I went to challenge Tuoba. What was Su Fingnian doing at that time? The Grand Master of Bronze Man asked in reply. What is Su Fingnian doing now? What are you doing now? One Section Willow raised his head and looked at the gradually fading clouds of fire. He pretended to be indifferent. His life is good. I lost to him, but it's not because of battle. The Grand Master of Bronze Man narrowed his eyes and looked at the twilight above his head. According to the records of the Chess and Sword Music School and the Princess's Tomb, from the Great Qin Dynasty to the Great Feng Dynasty to the Spring and Autumn period, in the past 800 years, there were only traces of banished immortals. There were a total of 37 of them, and all of them died young. These banished immortals had good lives. Naturally, they were born with good lives. But when they landed on the earth, most of them were unacclimatized and were harmed by the great Tao of the underworld. The Grand Master of Bronze Man sighed. The people of the world painstakingly seek longevity and prove the Tao of heaven. But that's only something in the pockets of the people of heaven above the clouds. You must know that no matter how delicious the food given out is, it's still food given out. One Section Willow Li Fingshou frowned and asked, Why are you telling me this? The Grand Master of Bronze Man calmly said, There aren't many good seedlings in Beimang now. As for the future, I advise you to turn back. Don't be a beggar or a thief. Learn from Li Chungang and Wang Xianji and become a bandit. Dusk descended and the sun set. One Section Willow slowly took off the bamboo hat used to block the sun. He coldly said, I've already died once. At most, I'll die again. The Grand Master of Bronze Man shook his head. Since it's like this, then rather than letting you die at the hands of Su Longxiang, it's better to let me send you on your way. One section Willow turned pale with fright. Without waiting for him to retreat, his entire body soared into the air. It was as if he was suspended in the middle of a spider web. His limbs were twisted and his head was twisted. Right at this moment, the Grand Master of Bronze Man looked towards the distant east. There was purple chi coming from the east. The Grand Master of Bronze Man hesitated for a moment. He leaned to the side and took a step towards the east. One step covered 100 jang. One section Willow, who had escaped this calamity, fiercely fell to the ground like a puddle of mud. One section Willow sat on the ground and gasped for breath. Then, he lost his mind and laughed wildly. Su Fengnian, you're even more damned to have met this monster than you are to have met Tuoba. Li Chuangong's bitter end is Wang Xianji, Wang Xianji's bitter end is you. Then today, you should have a taste of what those two people tasted. Chapter 1301. A green rainbow appeared on the land. The sword aura was sharp and unstoppable. It collided with Su Longxiang. The young man and the black tiger under Qi Xuanjin stood together. They didn't use the cold blade to meet the enemy. Instead, they stuck the war blade into the ground. In 3 years, the stubborn child who didn't want to go to Mount Longhu with the old immortal of the Taoist master's residence had grown to become the commander of an important border army in Beiliang. In the eyes of the world, the young man was different from his brother who didn't do proper work and often traveled the Jianghu. He was more like the son of the butcher Su Shao. He didn't like luxury and wasn't good at romance. However, he was famous on the battlefield like his father. He had won the title of the 10,000 enemy. There was only one flaw. He had never fought with a top master. However, he was the complete opposite of Su Fengnian from His Royal Highness to the King of Beiliang. Su Longxiang didn't have any doubts. Even when he led the dragon elephant cavalry at a young age, he quickly convinced the people. He even caused a storm in the official circles of Beiliang. Why didn't the amazing Su Longxiang inherit Su Zhao's title? Su Longxiang was carefully nurtured by Zhao Shituan of Mount Longhu. He taught him the dream of spring and autumn and gradually opened his mind. Huang Man was no longer the stupid Huang Man of the past. His mind was no different from that of an ordinary person. He also retained a pure heart. Although pure heart was a saying from the scholarly sage, it was actually no different from the Buddha who doesn't touch karma and Tao embryo who doesn't provoke dust recorded in the secret books. They could be considered as the immortality of the 3 sections. Su Longxiang turned a blind eye to the imposing and thick sword aura. Instead, he turned his head to look at the black tiger and grinned. In the eyes of outsiders, this spiritual creature that had once listened to the words of the sage beside the great Taoist Qi for dozens of years to comprehend the Tao was still somewhat suspected of being unworthy of this young man. The black tiger, which was twice the size of an ordinary king of the forest, had a very human expression on its face. It lowered its huge head and touched Su Longxiang's forehead. Su Longxiang reached out his hand to stroke Black Tiger's head and muttered to himself, "When I was young, my mother often punished my brother to recite books. Back then, I didn't understand anything and would forget what I heard. I only felt that my brother was reading books." At this point, Su Longxiang imitated the young Su Fengnian and shook his head. "Very beautiful." There was a smile on the young man's face. Later on, my father often said in private that our Su family's ancestral graves were blessed with green smoke. Finally, there was a scholar. Black Tiger suddenly lay on the ground. When he heard the word scholar, he revealed a deep sense of nostalgia. Once upon a time, on the demon-slaying platform of the Lotus Peak, the Jinren who was praised by the common people as having immortality would recite scriptures at sunrise and sunset every day. Occasionally, there would be people who would climb to the peak to visit and discuss the Tao with Qi Xuanjin. Lotus flowers would bloom from their mouths and spring thunder would sound. Black Tiger had accompanied Qi Xuanjun, the reincarnated ancestor Lu, for a long time. It was greatly blessed and had great fortune. Even the noble Huang Zi of the Taoist master's residence had to treat it with respect. They would never dare to treat it as a beast. The green rainbow was already less than 10 miles away from the man and the tiger. Su Longxiang smiled. When I was young, my eldest sister was lazy. She didn't even want to learn needlework, much less read and write. She only liked to listen to my brother tell stories of immortals. Every time she couldn't sleep, she would pull my brother to sit by the bed and tell him stories. She would only allow my brother to leave after she fell asleep. No matter how tired my brother was during the day, he wouldn't refuse. Furthermore, the things in my eldest sister's room were always thrown away carelessly. My brother would always help her tidy up when he was free. Later on, my eldest sister married far away in Jiangnan. Everything was neatly placed in its original place. My brother, who should have felt relaxed, was instead always very. Probably because he didn't know what words to use to describe his brother, the young man scratched his head and simply put down his brows. Su Longxiang forcefully exhaled. Looking forward, his gaze became determined. He said in a low voice, "My father is a big uncouth man. Furthermore, the matters at the border are incomparably heavy. Even if he wanted to, he was powerless. He never knew how to get along with us children. It was always my brother who took care of my 2 sisters and my idiotic younger brother. I don't know much, but since someone is fighting at our doorstep, and since I was born with some strength, I can't let my brother bear the burden alone like when I was young." Before I entered the Longxiang army, second sister said that there were some Qi cultivators in the Beimang army who were good at observing aura. They specifically targeted the top experts in the Beiliang army so that they could plan before taking action. She also said that the Beimang spider web had secretly formulated a series of dragon-slaying plans, placing my brother at the top of the list. I was also in the top 5. Thus, second sister didn't allow me to have killing intent in my heart and use all my strength to prevent the aura from leaking out. But I thought that rather than letting them sneak around and plot against my brother, it would be better for me to be the bait and disrupt their plans. Su Longxiang pointed at the green rainbow that was like a hot knife through butter. He smiled happily and said, "Look, didn't someone take the bait?" This time, Su Longxiang disobeyed military orders and led troops to intercept and kill the Chang cavalry. He did not wear the indestructible talisman armor, and did not even bring it with him. He left it in the commander-in-chief's tent outside Qingsang City. Since young, his elder brother, Su Fengnian, would always give him the best things, Su Jihu, Su Weisheng. It had always been like this. Su Longxiang clenched his fists and heavily punched in front of his chest. There seemed to be a loud sound of a bell ringing over thousands of miles of yellow sand. With him as the center, countless yellow sand rolled and spread out rapidly. At the same time, before the green rainbow arrived, the sword aura arrived. In the distance, the swordsman of the chess and sword music school, Huang Qing, closed his eyes. The ancient sword at his waist was still less than 2 inches out of its sheath. When the 2 sides fought, apart from that black tiger, no one else was watching. Copper Man, who was 100 miles away, also rushed to the east for the purple energy. However, if someone saw this and didn't know that the sword energy was close to Huang Qing's identity, even a grade 2 Master Realm expert would feel pity for this swordsman to use his sword energy so wantonly. When experts faced an enemy, they didn't compete in flashy moves. Instead, they focused on holding back when accumulating strength and not releasing it. After gathering strength, they would kill in one strike. For the green shirt swordsman to release his energy right before the fight, he was just too arrogant. Only those who had reached the first level of the Finger Mystery Realm could see some clues. This swordsman was not deliberately showing off his power like a street brawl, nor was he beating the drums to gain the upper hand before 2 armies faced each other. Instead, the aura of this person who was carrying a sword but had not drawn it was too strong. When the moon was full, it would fall. When water was full, it would overflow. Huang Qing's sword energy was so strong that he needed to suppress it to not injure others. The chess and sword music schools Huang Qing lived up to his name of sword energy close. Since he was so rich that he could rival a country, so what if he spent a lot of money? Huang Qing, who kept his eyes closed, muttered, "One dendrobium pearl," to the diamond realm. The sword in the sheath went from 2 inches to 3 inches. 1 dendrobium was 100 liters. How heavy was a pearl in the world, so how many dendrobium was there? The 3-inch sword gave off a glow, instantly giving off hundreds and thousands of green pearls formed from sword energy. Green pearls of different sizes rolled forward. Like numerous green lightning bolts rolling across the ground, heading straight for Su Longxiang. In the distance, Su Longxiang, who could already see the majestic scene, only twitched the corner of his mouth like he was disdainful. The teen raised his arm and punched the ground heavily. When Su Fingnian first appeared in the Beiliang frontier army, the teen Su Longxiang personally beat the drums. In the next moment, between the teen and the sword energy, sand dunes exploded. Earth dragons protruded out, yellow sand filled the sky. Like a bowl turning over. The teen who was born at the Diamond Realm and had the strength of a dragon elephant was close to the sword energy. The battle between the two of them would perhaps be a battle of strength that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. Chapter 1302. This battle of strength was also like a battle of contradictions. In the water element, the dragon force was the strongest, and in the land element, the elephant force was the strongest. Su Longxiang, the only lucky person in the world who was born in the Vajra realm, was known as Beiliang's sturdiest shield. However, he met Huang Qing of Beimang's 13 prefectures, who was the sharpest spear in Beimang. Huang Qing's sword was only 3 inches out, but it was already magnificent. It was like the sword Immortal in the sky had broken a string of prayer beads. Thousands of sword energy beads, big and small, fell on a jade plate and rolled forward. Su Longxiang, on the other hand, used the desert as a drum. With a punch, he attracted the scene of the earth bowl turning over. The sky and earth were turned upside down, and yellow tornadoes broke out of the ground continuously. The green pearls condensed by the sword energy were smashed into pieces in the yellow sand, filling the sky with dust and obscuring one's vision. Although the earth bowl had the unrivaled spirit of pulling up mountains and rivers, each and every one of the pearls guided by the sword aura contained spirituality. Although 8 or 9 out of 10 of them were shattered by the yellow sand tornado, there were still no less than 100 green sword pearls that bypassed the sand column and rushed towards Su Longxiang. Su Longxiang, who had a wooden expression, took a step forward. A fan-shaped sand wall was erected in front of him. The beads crashed into the wall one after another. There was both the brilliance of mutual destruction and the helplessness of hitting a rock with eggs. The green sword energy was flowing chaotically, and the yellow sand was also surging endlessly. When the green robe was about to be destroyed by the pearls, Huang Qing's left hand pressed on the sword, and he floated silently. Huang Qing casually took the sword from his waist and hit Su Longxiang's chest with the sword hilt. The calm disturbance, which was 3 inches out of the sheath, was knocked back into the scabbard after one hit. Su Longxiang was not sent flying. His feet were still rooted to the ground, but his body slid back several feet. The young man bent slightly, forcibly stopping the momentum of his retreat, and instantly began to sprint, smashing his fists toward the green-robed swordsman. With a flick of his wrist, Huang Qing held his sword horizontally in front of him. His left elbow pressed against the scabbard, forcefully resisting Su Longxiang's fists. The 6th most famous sword in the world, Calm Disturbance, let out an ear-piercing roar in the scabbard, and the scabbard trembled violently. Su Longxiang maintained his posture of striking the sword with his fists and continued to run forward, while Huang Qing was pushed back several dozen feet. Huang Qing, whose feet were a foot off the ground, tapped the ground lightly with his thumb. With a smile on his face, he calmly pulled his sword out of its sheath by an inch. Li Gu folded. Su Longxiang was too lazy to care about what kind of sword move, sword intent, and sword momentum this time, and smashed his fists again. 2-inch sword, stacked 2. 3 inches was 3 stacks. Su Longxiang punched the scabbard again and again. Although Huang Qing, who was hovering in the air, never abandoned his sword, he was unable to stop Su Longxiang's charge. However, as the number of punches from Li Gu increased, the distance Huang Qing retreated after each punch from the youth decreased. After Su Longxiang's 8th punch and Li Ji's 8 stacks, Huang Qing finally stood still, with the demeanor of a grandmaster who would not move even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. Huang Qing, whose sleeves were fluttering, looked at the youth in front of him. He did not speak, but there was undisguised surprise and admiration in his eyes. There was only a trace of disappointment after the dust had settled. His final fist contained the legendary strength of 8 dragons and 8 elephants, so he was naturally a rarely seen genius of the martial Dao. However, he, Huang Qing, still possessed the 9 folds of Li Gu, and even the 10-layered mountains that he evolved from. If this youth who was renowned throughout northern Mang's court stopped here, then he, Huang Qing, didn't dare say that he could defeat his opponent without even drawing his sword. At the very least, he would be in an invincible position. The reason why Huang Qing chose to use Li Gu to fight against Su Longxiang was that he did not have the thought of comparing the youth with Murong Baoding. The latter was a stone Buddha who had been famous for a long time. Huang Qing had once compared notes with the high-ranking imperial relative a few years ago. They did not fight to the death and did not overdo it. When Huang Qing was young, he was determined to use his sword to break the Vajra meditation of the white-robed monk of the 2 Zen temples and complete the feat that Tuoba Bodhisattva could not. Murong Baoding, who was known to be invincible, was undoubtedly the best test stone for his sword. It was said that the youth in front of him, who had cracked Murong Baoding's golden body in Qingcang City in Liuzhou, was even more so. The expressionless Su Longxiang threw out another punch in a seemingly lukewarm manner. The previous 8 punches were all done step by step, with the strength of the dragon and elephant progressing layer by layer. Huang Qing's Li Gu was nothing more than following the prescribed order, layer by layer. Huang Qing, who originally wanted to use Li Gu, felt his heart skip a beat. He resolutely abandoned Li Ji's 9-layered sword and shouted softly, jumping directly to the 10-layered mountain. Huang Qing, who was surrounded by 6 or 7 green rainbows, not only did not use the 10-layered mountain to block the impact of the 9th punch, but the green rainbows also exploded in the blink of an eye. The calm storm was smashed into an astonishing arc by the 2 punches. Huang Qing retreated again and again until he was 80 feet away before he could stop the decline. The scabbard of the calm storm was finally straightened with great difficulty. Huang Qing was neither angry nor fearful. Instead, he was amazed and gratified. He changed the sword stance from raising his arm horizontally to raising his sword vertically. In the blink of an eye, he took the opportunity to remove the huge remaining force from the sword. Huang Qing's thumb caressed the sword hilt. The scene of the sword energy pouring out into green rainbows was gone. However, the more it was like this, the more oppressive it felt, like a storm was coming. Li Chungang had passed away. Fortunately, there was still the peach blossom sword deity. Before Dong Tai, who went to the sea to visit immortals, returned to the land, he lifted the sea with his sword and flooded the Guanyin sect. Huang Qing had only gone to Liang River Lake once in his life, but he had stopped at northern Liang. He had met the young chief of Wudong Mountain, Li Yufu, once, and quickly returned to northern Mang. During this period of time, it could not be said that they were at each other's throats, nor were they at daggers drawn. Instead, he took the opportunity to admire the spectacular scenery of the 81 peaks. He also watched the peaceful scene of thousands of people practicing their fists in front of the Wudong main palace at Big Lotus Peak in the morning and evening. In the end, Huang Qing did not continue his long journey to the hinterland of the Central Plains. He did not challenge the white-robed monk Li Dongxin, nor did he meet Deng Taya, the new champion of the world's sword art. However, he left in high spirits and returned in high spirits. In addition, he occasionally learned something from his chat with Li Yufu, which was of great benefit to his martial arts cultivation. In terms of the word Dao, Huang Qing admitted that there was no clear winner in his short and amiable conversation with Li Yufu. However, in terms of the word skill, he had a vivid understanding. Su Longxiang did not pursue him. Huang Qing slightly raised the ancient sword in his hand and laughed softly. I am from chess and sword music school. My sword energy is close to Huang Qing's, and my sword is calm. When I was young, I entered the sword art through the way of chess and returned to the way of chess at the age of 30. I thought that returning to the way of sword art in my lifetime would be the end of my martial arts life. Unexpectedly, I found a new way by accident and reached the third realm of the three realms of chess player observation in my sect. With this, I created a new sword. I wanted to use this sword to compete with Dong Tai. The young man looked puzzled and whispered, "Just fight. Why are you so meddlesome?" Huang Qing smiled and explained patiently, "You said it was one sword, but it may be 100, 1,000, or even 10,000. To be precise, it should be a game of swords." Su Longxiang did not talk nonsense at all. He directly stepped forward and began to sprint in a straight line toward the chattering middle-aged swordsman. Huang Qing, who was like a scholar meeting a soldier, laughed it off. Then, he looked serious and closed his eyes to absorb the noble qi of heaven and earth. Waves of noble qi filled the space between heaven and earth. It vaguely formed a chessboard, with the famous rivers in the world as the winding chess lines and the huge mountains as the huge chess pieces. It formed a small kiliocosm. If the strength that Huang Qing had shown so far was that his swordsmanship was only at the mysterious level and his will was not at the celestial level, but his mind at the moment reached the level of an immortal on earth. It was no wonder that Huang Qing returned to Beiliang happily after a trip to Beimang. Huang Qing let go of the calm disturbance in his hand, and the ancient sword quickly floated in front of him. The sword was halfway out. Huang Qing's right hand made the shape of lifting and placing chess pieces, and said softly, "Mount Wudong." Top. Top was one of the terms of Go. It was just right to restrain Su Longxiang's seemingly dignified but slightly clumsy chess style. A sword aura was born. Su Longxiang's shoulder crashed into the ethereal aura of the Mount Wudong, in front of him. Huang Qing continued to lift and place chess pieces. The change of the first two pieces was very small. That was why it was called Little Sharp. But the sword aura was vigorous and solid. As the saying goes, there is no evil hand in a small point. Huang Qing's chess moves, or sword moves, were also upright. It was just a normal game of chess. Of course, it was one piece after another. But this game of chess created by Huang Qing was like flying pieces, not following the rules at all. After the small point, it was the tight qi. After the tight qi, it was the elephant step. Then, it was the combination of the seal and suppression. There was also the continuous power of the Thousand Treasure Pavilion. Huang Qing's elegant face glowed with a kind of solemn and dignified brilliance. All the yellow sand that could be blown by the breeze was strangely still at this moment. Only the majestic sword aura was wantonly rampaging. I have an abundant sword aura that is unparalleled in the world. There will be a sword to tell the world. I have been depressed for 40 years. Today, I have to speak my mind. Chapter 1303. The sword qi was like a mountain or an abyss. It was like a river or a river, it was like a fish or a dragon. Within 2 miles of the youth, the sword qi rose and fell one after another. No matter how recklessly Su Longxiang charged, it was difficult for him to get close to Huang Qing and the half-unsheathed calm disturbance. Instead, from time to time, he was hit by the majestic sword qi and staggered back. Before he could stand still, he was hit by the continuous following moves. One side was like a trapped beast fighting, while the other side was motionless. How could a chess piece compete with a chess player outside the game? It was obvious who was better and who was worse. What was more frightening was that Huang Qing's new sword did not weaken after a spurt of energy. On the contrary, the moves became more and more smooth, and the artistic conception of the sword gradually entered a better state. The more Su Longxiang struggled fiercely with his powerful body, the more meticulous and seamless Huang Qing's moves became. It seemed that the sword qi, who was determined to correct the name of Beimang's sword art, was using Su Longxiang as a whetstone. The more indestructible the whetstone was, the sharper the sword edge would be under the sharpening of the two. No matter how shallow and narrow-minded a layman was, he knew that when the half-sword was completely unsheathed, its power would be able to destroy even the bodhisattva of the human world with an indestructible golden body. The young man on the chessboard was hit on the shoulder by a sword qi that was as thick as an arm. His thin and weak body tumbled a few times in the air. After his feet landed on the ground, he still slid 7 or 8 feet away, leaving 2 marks on the sand. However, the yellow sand and dust were suppressed by the sword qi, and it only floated up for an inch before it was suppressed again. One could see the general situation from a small clue. Even if Su Longxiang did not move or trigger Huang Qing's sword qi to launch a counterattack, as long as he was on the chessboard, he was constantly fighting against the sword intent that encompassed 3 miles of area. But even so, Su Longxiang ran tirelessly again and again without showing the slightest sign of fatigue. The so-called infinite strength of the world was extremely suitable for the youth. Su Longxiang raised his head and looked at the green-robed swordsman in the distance. His eyes shone with a faint golden light. He rushed forward again, but this time he did not run in a straight line. The young man's figure left behind a long series of frozen afterimages on the sand. His running path could be vaguely seen. The short distance was messy and disorderly, but if stretched out, it was a half-moon arc. Without exception, those afterimages were all destroyed and dissipated under the crushing pressure of the sword qi. When the last afterimage, which was only 10 feet away from Huang Qing, disappeared, the swordsman who was closest to the sword qi raised his arm and put 2 fingers together, making the gesture of twisting a piece. He paused 3 times in the process. With each pause, the sword qi in front of Huang Qing became denser and denser. After 3 consecutive moves, the 2 of them were in high spirits and showed their sharpness. The chessboard that Huang Qing had set up suddenly became thicker and stronger, as if 3 huge chess pieces had been added to the chessboard. Su Longxiang ran 3 times, each time louder than the last. The last time he knocked away the sword qi, his figure, which had been like a hot knife through butter, showed a trace of stagnation for the first time. Huang Qing smiled slightly and turned his wrist, changing the pressure into a hook. A streak of sword qi broke out of the ground, slanted up and hit a spot in the air. It was like waiting for a rabbit to come out of a tree stump, knocking away Su Longxiang, who had appeared in a flash. There was a saying in Elephant that the earth and earth carried all things. Then Huang Qing's sword was drawn from the earth, seeking the earth in one go. Su Longxiang, who had been knocked into the air, did not have time to react before the sword qi pulled out of the ground smashed into his body. The sword qi was as sharp as an earth dragon or a yellow flood dragon. Even if Su Longxiang was knocked back to the ground, it did not stop. The youth stuck his hands into the ground and his feet against the sand, trying to reduce the distance he retreated. However, the sword qi was so powerful that the youth's body kept exploding with clouds of yellow fog. When a streak of sword qi hit his left shoulder, Su Longxiang's shoulder obviously dropped down, his chest almost touching the ground. When he slapped his left hand and raised his shoulder, he barely blocked the sword qi. The second streak, the third streak, the fourth streak, countless sword qi that grew out of the ground and wrapped in yellow sand came down again. Inch by inch, the youth's body kept sinking down. His 5 fingers formed a hook and supported himself on the ground. The Dechu dynasty once had an overlord who could carry the cauldron. Even if you, Su Longxiang, had great strength, could you bear the weight of heaven and earth? Huang Qing really wanted to see it for himself. Since the original intention of using Su Longxiang to sharpen this new sword had been fulfilled, Huang Qing wanted to use this gifted youth to weigh the weight of the white-robed monk, so as to pave the way for a future battle. Qi was born when one's thoughts moved, and a square inch expanded the heaven and earth. This was Huang Qing's unique way of swordsmanship, which was different from Li Chungang, who was conceited about everything in the world and the sword, and also different from Dong Tai, who reached the extreme of swordsmanship. Only half of the calm disturbance sword was used, but it already had such spirit. It was very likely that Huang Qing had already touched the threshold of the land sword Immortal. Qi Xuanzhen of Mount Longhu once joked that Xian Ji was just a bowing slave, celestial phenomenon was just lowering their heads and begging, only land immortals were considered sitting cross-legged. It meant that for celestials, comprehending Xian Ji was just a bowing slave. Ascending to the celestial phenomenon realm was just a fluke and begging for a bit of heaven's secret. Only by becoming a land immortal could one be considered not bowing or lowering their heads. However, it was only sitting cross-legged between heaven and earth, which was still a bit shorter than the heavenly way. It was said that there was once an unknown master who went to the demon-slaying platform to ask Qi Xuanzhen, using his spear to attack his shield. He asked Qi Xuanzhen how he should deal with himself. It was said that great immortal Qi only smiled and replied, "Please allow me, who is sitting cross-legged, to stretch out my leg." He was indeed the reincarnation of Ancestor Lu, who had once passed the heavenly gate but did not enter. At the same time, Qi Xuanzhen also said a strange prophecy that was shrouded in clouds and mist. Land immortals have differences in life and death, but there is no difference in superiority. No matter whether Huang Qing was standing or sitting, as long as he reached the sword immortal realm where he could use the power of heaven and earth, plus he was not in the 3 sects, he would have the qualification to be called invincible. Chapter 1304. Huang Qing opened his eyes and looked at the young man who was almost lying on the ground. There was some pity in his eyes. He felt sorry for the young man's talent, but there was also some obscure self-mockery. The Taiping order once said that where a poisonous snake appeared, there must be herbs. This was the natural law of all things in the world. The more a carp turned into a dragon, the more difficult it was to escape. 100 years ago, Lu Songtao was invincible in the world and sealed the mountain for a nameless wandering Taoist. Li Chuangong's swordsmanship was known to be on par with heaven. He opened the gate of heaven whenever he wanted, but he was restrained by Wang Xianji. In the end, Wang Xianji died in the hands of Su Fengnian. Huang Qing calmed his mind and collected his thoughts. In front of him, Su Longxiang had already been blasted into the huge pit by countless sword qis. In his field of vision, with the young man as the center, numerous yellow Jiao dragon sword qis rose from the ground like blooming flower buds. They continuously smashed onto the young man's back, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. After all, it was reasonable that the strength of the dragon and elephant could not defeat the grand atmosphere of heaven and earth. Although Huang Qing was a little regretful that the young man did not make him use all his strength, it was not easy for him to hold on for so long in a game of swordsmanship. Huang Qing did not want to kill Su Longxiang in this way. It was not that he was afraid of being hated by the young king of Beiliang in the future, but that Huang Qing was able to reach the great grandmaster realm of swordsmanship today, and he had a matching breadth of mind. Huang Qing reached out and pressed down on the calm storm, then suddenly pushed it back into the scabbard. Place the heaven's origin. At the same time, a terrifying sword qi as thick as the roots of a mountain fell from the sky. The sword qi exploded into the ground, just like a famous sword returning to its scabbard. The sword qi was so rich that it was exaggerated to the point of flowing water. It crazily overflowed from the big pit and flowed rapidly outside the big pit, soaking the yellow sand. Huang Qing sighed slightly in his heart and turned to return to Gusai state. The calm storm in his hand trembled slightly, and the amplitude was increasing. Huang Qing frowned and looked at the big pit again. He could not detect a trace of vitality, but because of this, the laughter squeezed out from the throat like a beast was particularly terrifying. A thin figure in ragged clothes walked out along the slope of the pit. He was bent and his hands were hanging low. When he raised his head, Huang Qing was a pair of golden eyes. There was not the slightest hint of emotion in those eyes. There was neither sadness nor joy, neither worry nor joy. In the blink of an eye, Huang Qing controlled the sword qi to erect 6 tall walls behind him. The youth, who had lost his human aura, instantly appeared behind Huang Qing. He then began to run, smashing through the 6 walls in one breath. His running speed did not decrease but instead increased. When he was 2 zhang away from Huang Qing, the youth leaped high into the air and pounced at Huang Qing. Huang Qing's hand that was holding the sword slid down and grasped the end of Calm Disturbance's scabbard. After raising his arm, the hilt of the sword accurately hit the young man's throat. Huang Qing said in a low voice, "Dismissed." A bright sword light bloomed in front of the young man's chest. But what surprised Huang Qing was that after the collision, the young man tilted his head back and then hit forward at a faster speed. Not only did he break the sword qi, but he also almost lost his sword. Huang Qing took a few steps back. During this time, his 5 fingers loosened briefly. When the hilt of the calm storm was knocked back to his palm, he held it again. Fortunately, he did not fail miserably. Otherwise, the sword qi would have been knocked out of his hand by the young man's throat. But Huang Qing's palm was also bleeding. Huang Qing's wrist shook. The sword was only an inch out when the young man landed and twisted his body. He held the hilt with one hand and gently pushed his chest with the other. Not only was the calm storm pushed back into the scabbard, but Huang Qing was also pushed more than 100 feet away by the young man. Huang Qing, who was flying backwards, stepped on the air a few times like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, creating a long string of mysterious ripples that looked like water ripples. When those ripples gradually expanded and came into contact with each other, sword qi swayed like lotuses from the water. These 20 or so green lotuses were as tall as an adult in the blink of an eye, blocking the path of the young man. The young man with golden eyes stared at Huang Qing. In the process of sprinting, he grinned but did not speak. His hands casually tore apart the green lotuses that were in his way. Huang Qing took half a step forward, and the back of his shoe was completely covered by the yellow sand. Then, he drew an arc on the ground and took half a step back. The yellow sand behind him was pulled by this half step, and he actually pulled out a crescent-shaped sand dragon that was more than 100 feet long. Huang Qing's move was not the sword out of the scabbard, but the scabbard leaving the sword. It was aimed at the young man's heart. Since ancient times, swords had always been shorter and shorter. The Qin sword was more than 22 inches long, while the Dafeng sword was only 19 inches and 6 fen. Later on, the 9 kingdoms' private sword furnaces aside, the imperial court swords all had different lengths, but they did not exceed the Dafeng sword. However, the Calm Storm, which was one of the most famous swords in the world, was a new weapon that had been forged for less than 20 years. It was as long as the ancient sword of the Qin dynasty, 21 inches and 3 fen. It was to seek the profound meaning of long sword to reach far. This was probably the expectation of the person who gave the sword to Huang Qing. After Huang Qing unsheathed the scabbard instead of the sword, he silently recited, 16 views. The scabbard was 16 inches away from the sword tip. Every inch out, there was a view. One view, one form. 16 wonderful visions appeared in the 16 inches in the air. First, there was an illusory little man in a green robe sitting on the sword tip in Huang Qing's hand. He was facing the west. There was a rising sun, shaped like a hanging drum. When the red sun was seen, it opened and closed its eyes. After the sun view, there was a water view. There was ice like colored glaze, shining brightly. Next, there was the Vidra Seven Treasures Golden Pagoda, shining brightly. There were constantly precious trees, precious ponds, and precious lotuses growing. There was the endless music of the heavens, and the fairies' scattered flowers. Most of Huang Qing's sword. One sword gave birth to Buddha. Su Longxiang's heart was struck by this sword, or rather, the scabbard. His body maintained a charging posture, but he suddenly stopped. Huang Qing slowly moved forward and pushed the sword back into the scabbard. Every inch the sword returned to the scabbard, there was a form that dissipated, and the young man took a step back. Huang Qing looked at the young man 16 steps away and sighed softly. I only know that ghosts and gods can protect things, but I don't know that dragons and elephants will turn into ashes. Chapter 1305. To the north of Qingsang City in Liuzhou, Beimang's vanguard had arrived at the ancient Dong Beach. This place was originally one of a series of passes outside the Great Wall built by the Dafeng dynasty when the army was at its peak. It was used to store military supplies and food, and was used to suppress Rongdi when they went out of the pass. However, it had long become a ruined site for traveling scholars to write poems and reminisce about the past. The low city walls that were built with quicksand, loose stones and red willow reeds in the early years were still faintly visible. The higher trenches on both sides of the city walls had long been shaved off by the sandstorm year after year. Merchants traveling between Beiliang and the western regions could still occasionally pick up some broken arrowheads, broken knives, copper coins and other antiques. Therefore, the ancient Dong Beach was called. General Lu Gui's commander's tent was stationed on the north bank of a small lake in the ancient Dong Beach. Around the commander's tent, in addition to many skilled guards in the army, there were also more than 10 well-known Beimang Jianghu people. In fact, it was not only border commander Lu Gui who had this privilege. Any general at the border would have such a small group of heroes around him, in case of any accident. The war was imminent. If a Beiliang martial arts grandmaster came to take the head of a general in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers, it would not only make the Liang imperial court laugh at him, but also hurt the morale of the Beimang army. However, Lu Gui was obviously a very special one among the powerful generals of the southern dynasties. Otherwise, he would not have been praised as half of Su Shao by the Empress of Beimang. Therefore, in addition to a large number of personal guards and retainers in the commander's tent, there were also many assassins. In addition, there was a group of more hidden hermits. Everyone had an unworldly aura and lived in seclusion. These strange people with withered faces were Qi watchers. Most of them were from the remnants of the spring and autumn period. In Beimang, they were always superior to the direct descendants of the powerful families. The former abbot of Aquarius State was convicted of killing 2 Qi watchers by mistake and was exiled to an extremely cold place thousands of miles away. After Great General Lu Gui led the army to Gudong Beach, there was nothing unusual about him. He ate and slept as usual. Various military orders were passed out of the commander's tent in an orderly manner. He even personally rode to the front line to check on the situation. This made the Qi watchers and expert retainers extremely nervous. They were afraid that the young and naturally aggressive king of Beiliang would suddenly attack the army camp in a rage. No matter how valuable their Qi watchers' lives were, they could not be compared to Great General Lu Gui. Who did not know that Lu Gui was one of the best candidates for the commander of the Central Plains campaign in the eyes of the Empress? His position was even far ahead of Great General Yang Yuanzhan and the other abbot of the southern dynasties. At this time, Lu Gui was squatting alone by the lake. News of the unusual movements of the dragon elephant cavalry had long reached the commander's tent. A few of his confidants had suggested that they use this opportunity to lead the army down south and flatten Qingsang City, which did not have enough military strength. Lu Gui did not agree. Thinking of the bloodthirsty light that he was all too familiar with in the eyes of those young people, Lu Gui could not help but smile. It was good to be young. They did not even care about life and death. However, it was an old man like him, who could lie down and enjoy a comfortable life, who cherished his life more and more. However, Lu Gui, who had not yet reached the end of his life, cherished his life, but he was not afraid of losing or dying. However, he did not care about Liuzhou, much less a small Qingsang city that did not affect the overall situation. Previously, Fatty Dong had been hiding and making a series of gaudy movements on the border that even his own people could not deceive. Now, he had finally revealed some of his fangs. Even if he had been sent to Liuzhou and was destined to do some shady business that added icing on the cake, Lu Gui was not angry. After all, from the beginning, Lu Gui had his eyes set on a piece of fat meat that was even more tempting than the Baron Bailiang. The Central Plains. Lu Gui muttered to himself, "When I was young, I read a line in a book. Riches and honor that do not return to one's hometown is like walking at night. The older I get, the deeper my feelings become." Lu Gui suddenly thought of something and laughed self-mockingly. Back then, when the emperor said that he was half Su Shao, it really had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantages were naturally that his reputation in the Southern Dynasty army had risen. As for the disadvantages, they were now beginning to show. He heard that the 30,000 dragon elephant cavalry did not even need their commander to say anything. They all spontaneously wanted to chop off their own heads and use them as urinals. Lu Gui subconsciously touched his neck. A few days ago, his old friend had sent him a letter. In the letter, he had ridiculed Yang Yuanzhan for being far less valuable than Great General Lu's head. Lu Gui heard a series of urgent shouts behind him. He stood up and turned around to see 3 people jogging over. One of them was the new commander of the Black Fox Shelter, the other was a master from the chess and sword music school, and the leader of the Qi Watchers under his command. The last one had a panicked expression. He quickly walked over and whispered, "Great General, we saw a Qi coming from the east. Its target is the commander's tent. If there are no big surprises, it should be the king of Bailiang himself. At the latest, it will take 3 incense sticks to burn." Lu Gui was stunned. He knew very well that Dong Zhuo was about to make a big move in the northern regions of Yuanliang. He smiled and asked, "Has the king of Bailiang gone mad?" Lin Fu said helplessly, "My dear great general, look at the situation. Who cares if Su Fengnian's brain is flooded with water? Let's quickly set up a defensive line. This kind of top-notch martial arts grandmaster can break through a formation by himself. If he is determined to make a move on you, great general, you really can't underestimate him." Lu Gui's expression did not change. However, he was not arrogant enough to wait for the world's most powerful person to come to him. He said calmly, "Lin Fu, pass down the order. The Central Army will turn east. Then, let Huyan Kachin and Yelu Zongtang each lead 500 fast and light cavalry troops to the left and right flanks. You will lead another 180 Black Fox shelters and act according to the situation. As for the palace's private army, let them arrange themselves. They are more experienced in dealing with Jianghu masters." Lin Fu whispered, "Do we need to place 200 heavy cavalry troops at the front of the battle formation?" Chapter 1306. Lu Gui glared at him and said, "Let's not talk about whether the 200 heavy cavalry can stop the king of Bailiang. Even if they can, how many of them will be left? Even if you don't feel sorry for them, I do." Lin Fu chuckled and did not dare to take matters into his own hands. He quickly turned and ran off to deploy the troops. Lu Gui walked side by side with the Qi refinement warrior in white and the master from the chess and sword music school. The Qi refinement warrior seemed to have been influenced by the general's calmness in the face of danger. He was no longer as anxious as before. He said softly, "General, please rest assured. The 600 well-trained men that His Majesty has bestowed upon him are not very useful if they are used to break through the enemy's lines. However, they are very effective against these lone warriors. Although the king of Bailiang is indeed very powerful, I believe that he is not so powerful that. Lu Gui smiled and continued the conversation. Killing people as if they are taking something out of their pocket, right? The Qi refinement warrior looked a little embarrassed. Lu Gui said calmly, although I don't know the depth of that Su Fengnian, I feel that if he really wants to die together with me, it is not difficult for him to kill me, Lu Gui. The difficulty lies in how he can escape unscathed. The reason why I say that he is crazy is not because the Su Fengnian knows that he cannot do it but because he feels that it is not worth it for him to exchange the king of Beliang's life for my life, Lu Gui's. Lu Gui smiled and said, I am very assured. All of you should be even more assured. Our Taiping commandery is always meticulous. We may have a backup plan in the dark. The swordsman from the chess and sword music school smiled knowingly. About half an hour later, an eye-opening army appeared in front of Lu Gui's army. There were less than 600 of them. However, each of them, who were known as the material officers in the Beimang army, was unusually burly and muscular. Everyone had the back of a tiger, the waist of a bear, and the arms of an ape. Beiliang had many crossbows, while Beimang had many strong bows. This was a fact that everyone knew. However, at this moment, Lu Gui's army was lined up in a ballista formation. What was even more frightening was that there wasn't a single light crossbow in this battle formation. Even the waist crossbows were in the minority. Most of them were large ballistae and cloud-piercing crossbow carts that could be used to attack and defend cities. That cloud-piercing crossbow chariot required 12 resource officers to operate and stored 50 crossbow bolts. Each crossbow bolt was 3 feet long, no different from a sword or saber. Moreover, the tip of the arrow was coated with a green poison. Back then, when Northern Mang's Empress Murong solicited the forces of the pugilistic world, it wasn't something that could be accomplished just by moving her lips. It was precisely this item that had established a miraculous merit and ruthlessly crushed the sects and gangs that refused to be controlled one after another. Within 200 steps, when an arrow was shot out, it was said to be equivalent to the full blow of a second-level Supreme Power Master. If this description wasn't enough to describe the fearsomeness of the ballista and the cloud-piercing ballista, then there was an even more shocking description. Within 100 steps, an arrow was equivalent to a flying sword. These crossbows were built and maintained at the cost of abandoning their original purpose. In exchange, the Empress had said, if the people of Jianghu are not willing to obediently jump around in Jianghu, then I'll skewer you into candied gourds. On the battlefield, if one was really targeted to death by such a large number of crossbows, they would not hesitate to accidentally injure their own soldiers. How could a valiant person who could break through enemy lines fight hundreds of battles and live a long life? Lu Gui was heavily guarded at the back of the army. He didn't deliberately put on his shining armor, nor did he set up an eye-catching flag. He looked straight ahead, squinted his eyes, and didn't say a word. A subordinate general beside the general said worriedly, in fact, the decisive factor is the 3 waves of arrows between 250 steps. If the last wave of arrows, which is as powerful as a flying sword, can't do anything, and that person breaks into the army, it's most likely too late to change the direction of the ballista. Lu Gui pointed at the ballista formation in front of him that was constantly changing under the instructions of the Qi cultivators. He shook his head and smiled, then you've underestimated these Qi cultivators and material officers' ballista. If you look carefully at the width and thickness of the ballista formation, you'll know that the direction of attack of the arrows is not one line or a few lines horizontally. Instead, they're determined to shoot a huge fan-shaped rain of arrows vertically. Even if that person doesn't break the formation in a straight line, these ballista can also respond under the command of the Qi cultivators. The power of the ballista itself is indeed terrifying, but what's more terrifying are these Qi cultivators and material officers who came prepared from the beginning. The general lamented, it's no wonder that our Beimang's Jianghu is not as lively as Liang's. Lu Gui sneered, what's the use of being so lively in the Jianghu? A bunch of boorish men who only know how to use martial arts to break the rules. They don't care about the country at all. I dare say that in the future, when our dynasty steps into the hinterland of the Central Plains, there will be plenty of Liang's Jianghu experts who will help us kill people. They might even kill people with more heart and soul than our Beimang's army. Lu Gui suddenly stopped talking. A dazzling purple spot appeared in the farthest distance of the old man's vision. The general beside him gasped and said in a trembling voice, "It's really coming." Lu Gui subconsciously raised his arm to give the order. After he put down his arm, his expression was complicated for a moment. He muttered to himself, "He's indeed Su Zhao's son." The purple aura came from the east without stopping. There was a loud bang in the ballista formation. The ballista arrows were shot and pierced through the air. Almost at the same time, a second wave of ballista arrows rained down toward the purple aura in the sky. In an instant, with the ballista formation as the fulcrum, hundreds of ballista arrows that looked like the bones of a fan were shot out. Half of them were no different from the sword of an immortal. But after the blink of an eye, the purple aura swept through the sky without any pause. It continued to streak through the sky and disappeared in a flash. It actually disappeared above Lu Gui's army just like that. Lu Gui, whose back was facing the army, took a small step forward at some point. His face was gloomy. He casually pushed aside the swordsman's corpse in front of him and looked to the west. A ballista arrow pierced through the corpse's chest and nailed into the ground beside Lu Gui's feet. Even the tail of the arrow could not be seen. Lu Gui ignored the panicked shouts of the guards around him and said indifferently with a fake smile, "It's impolite not to reciprocate." Chapter 1307. Using the crossbow formation, not only did they fail to stop the Eastern Purple Qi, but it also caused the chess and sword music school's sword master to be killed by a crossbow arrow in order to protect Grand General Lu Gui. Once the Jianghu people with superior martial strength stepped onto the battlefield, although they would quickly obtain glory and wealth, they might not be able to hold on tightly to that rootless position in the army. Perhaps before they could even warm up, they would suddenly die. An ordinary-looking material officer in armor quickly rushed to Lu Gui's side. With an apologetic expression, he cupped his fists and smiled bitterly. "Your subordinate is incompetent and has frightened Grand General." There was an unshakable iron law in the Beimang army. If the commander-in-chief died in battle, the generals and kiliarchs under him would all be sentenced to death. Other than Lu Gui himself, who could not see anything strange, everyone was probably breaking out in cold sweat. Lu Gui waved his hand and dismissed it with a smile. This middle-aged soldier hiding in the crossbow formation was not simple. He was the youngest junior of Qilin Immortal of the Dao sect. He was at the Finger Xian realm and the crossbow formation was under his full control. This was also reasonable. After all, weapons were dead. Even if the crossbow arrow had the power of a flying sword, if it could not even catch the qi of the enemy expert, even if there were thousands of crossbow arrows, it would be useless. The Qi cultivator's Qi observation talent was ultimately lagging behind that of a Finger Xian realm grandmaster. In fact, in the rain of arrows, the last arrow of the Dao sect's immortal was the most threatening. However, the king of Beiliang was also enraged because of this. Not only did he use his hand to catch the arrow, but he also threw an arrow at Lu Gui who was in the middle of the formation. In the end, the chess and sword music school's expert became the scapegoat. Lu Gui was somewhat puzzled. If the king of Beiliang did not want to kill people to establish his authority, what was he planning to do? At this critical juncture where the Battle of Liangmang was imminent, why did he run alone to the barren land west of Liuzhou? Logically speaking, there should be a group of Chang cavalry there to disrupt the situation. However, although the Chang cavalry had sharp blades and fast horses, there were only 10,000 of them and they were destined to not be able to affect the overall situation. Just when Lu Gui was full of doubts, an old Qi watcher squeezed out of the encirclement of the personal guards and walked quickly to Lu Gui's side. He whispered, "General, another top master suddenly appeared in the west. His momentum is not weaker than that of the king of Beiliang. The two will soon collide. It seems that they are going to stop the king of Beiliang from going west. The Chang cavalry broke in and the Dragon Elephant cavalry unreasonably split their forces. Lu Gui suddenly laughed and said, "Interesting. Even my bait wasn't able to get the king of Beiliang to take the bait. How did the little Chang cavalry manage to succeed?" Lu Gui immediately stopped laughing. He called the leader of the Black Fox Guards, Lin Fu, and ordered in a deep voice, "Qi refinement warriors, split into 3 groups. The first group will lead the crossbow formation to the west. The other 2 groups will lead the 2 wings of Huyan Kachin and Yelu Zongtang's personal guards with 500 men each. As for you, Lin Fu, bring all the Black Fox Guards. I will give you another 200 heavy cavalry and 10,000 light cavalry. Ignore the king of Beiliang's movements. Just focus on finding the Long Xiang army that has left the main army and fight them at all costs." Lin Fu was surprised and asked carefully, "General, what if the Qingsang city garrison and the deputy general of the Long Xiang army, Li Mofan, choose to leave the city now and attack Gudong Beach?" Lu Gui snorted and asked in return, "Even if they have the guts, do they have the guts?" Lin Fu shrank his neck and did not dare to say another word. Danger lurked everywhere on the battlefield. Danger was always present, but opportunities were fleeting. Whether one was a mediocre person who had no achievements or mistakes, or a famous general on the battlefield who could turn the tide, it all depended on the commander's decision. Lu Gui saw that the Tao de sects Taoist priest, who was young but had an extremely high seniority, seemed to be hesitating. He was probably afraid that he would fall into the trap of luring the tiger away from the mountain. Once he was assassinated by the Beiliang loyalists in Liuzhou, His Majesty would vent his anger on the Tao de sect. The old man laughed softly and said, "Taoist priest, there is no need to waste your time by this old man's side. You won't be able to achieve anything. If we can defeat the Long Xiang army this time, I will personally ask His Majesty for a reward." Even though this Daoist whose attire was no different from the head of the materials official was the esteemed state preceptor Yuan Qingshan's junior brother, he was still extremely respectful before Lu Gui. When he heard what was said, his favorable impression of this great general increased by a bit. Northern Mang's nobles and martial artists were mostly condescending. The Daoist inwardly decided that regardless of whether Flo Province's battle was a success or failure, when he returned to the sect, he was going to persuade his senior brothers to place a heavy bet on Lu Gui and not stake everything on the Ruan cavalry's commander Hong Jingyan. Bei Mang's method of annihilating Buddhism was even more ruthless and tragic than Li Yang's. The power of Taoism was like the sun in the midday sky, especially after his senior apprentice brother had transformed into a rainbow and ascended. The Tao de sect's status rose like a boat on a rising tide. It was believed that if he could form a relationship with Lu Gui before he made his mark, Bei Mang would definitely unify the Taoism of the Central Plains when it unified the world in the future. Mount Longhu, which could still be considered the ancestral court of Taoism, would definitely not be able to compete with the Tao de sect, which was close to Lu Gui, for the position of leader. Lu Gui stood where he was and looked at the dust that was gradually rising in the distance. Suddenly, he laughed involuntarily. "It can't be that Bei Mang is finished before our battle has even begun, right? So there's a big battle before a big battle. The order of peace, what a good plan." The purple clouds came from the east and left to the west. A golden bronze figure with a majestic aura like that of a celestial being strode forward. The dust that was kicked up by his feet was even greater than the gallop of 1,000 cavalry. The purple clouds seemed unwilling to be tangled up with this person. Even when they passed by the crossbow formation and Lu Gui's army, the purple clouds did not change their path. The purple clouds shifted their direction slightly, but the golden giant took a step to the side and stomped out a large pit, continuing to block their path. The purple clouds still didn't want to collide with it. Their speed didn't decrease, but their path forward quickly shifted to the side again. The great Grand Master of the chess and sword music school's bronze figure was unforgiving. Once again, he chose to confront the purple clouds head-on. The road faced the sky, but the bronze figure's grandmaster was unwilling to separate from the purple clouds. Nothing could be done more than 3 times. In the blink of an eye, the purple clouds, who no longer deliberately held back, were already within reach of the bronze figure's grandmaster. This was the first time the bronze figure's grandmaster had seen this heaven-shaking young man up close. His entire body flowed with a purple-gold aura, and the date mark between his eyebrows was like an inverted third eye. That pair of ice-cold eyes was somewhat similar to the sect's junior Hong Jingyan, who had been born with eyes but failed to see since childhood. Was this the king of Beimang, Su Fengnian? The bronze figure's grandmaster opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. However, at the same time, his abdomen swelled like a large bell. A palm pushed out horizontally. It seemed to be played down, but its power could split rivers and split mountains. Su Fengnian suddenly accelerated and brushed past him. The yellow sand behind him caved in, forming a 30-meter-long 5-fingered palm print. The bronze figure retreated like rolling thunder. His speed was unexpectedly not inferior to Su Fengnian's. One person swept forward, the other swept backward, and they continued to walk side by side. The bronze figure's grandmaster extended a hand in an attempt to hook Su Fengnian's neck. Su Fengnian raised his elbow to block the golden giant's hook. The two separated upon contact, pulling apart a distance of 3 meters. They still maintained their original advancing posture. The bronze figure's left foot landed on the ground and took root. His right foot spun, and his figure stopped first. In the instant he turned around, Su Fengnian's figure was already half a mile away. After the tall and sturdy Northern Mang martial arts master who resembled the legendary Kunlun Immortal stopped, he took a deep breath and opened his mouth wide, swallowing the vital energy of heaven and earth like a whale. With his majestic body as the center, circles of invisible ripples spread out. The ground shook and cracked, tearing out a pattern like a spider web. The golden giant leaped up, rapidly closing the distance between the two. In the air, he raised his arm high and heavily smashed down towards the back of Su Fengnian's head. But Su Fengnian suddenly stopped. The bronze figure's fist smashed into the air 6 feet above the ground, maintaining the posture of a lion hunting a rabbit in front of Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian's toes tapped, slanted upwards, and lightly tapped the bronze figure's shoulder, trying to continue forward. The bronze figure's grandmaster who straightened his back shouted, "How dare you!" A palm slammed down from the air. A whirlpool of wind and clouds suddenly appeared in the sky. At the same time, the bronze figure's grandmaster raised his other hand. A tornado rushed up from the ground. The image above was taken from the sky, and the method below was taken from the earth. The two collided, attacking Su Fengnian between heaven and earth. Su Fengnian's figure lightly spun, barely avoiding this earth-shattering collision. But his advance was finally blocked by the bronze figure's grandmaster. The latter took a step forward, using the magical power of shrinking heaven and earth into a square inch. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Su Fengnian's ankle in the air, drawing a semicircle in the air, and fiercely smashed it out. Su Fengnian opened the 5 fingers of his left hand, lightly brushing, and forcibly stopping his body. This was the first time he stood still, facing the bronze figure's grandmaster who had always been suppressed by Hong Jingyan in the chess and sword music school. The bronze figure's grandmaster sneered, "Want to leave?" Su Fengnian's face was expressionless, not answering. His line of sight directly jumped over the golden giant, looking further west. The bronze figure's grandmaster glanced at the young king of Bailiang saber at his waist, saying flatly, "It's very difficult if you don't use your saber." This was not a wild boast from the bronze figure's mouth. Others did not know this person's ability, but Su Fengnian knew a little. The Tide Listening Pavilion had a top-secret file, in which there was early contact with the 6-pearl bodhisattva of Mount Lontua. But the hidden strength of the bronze figure's grandmaster was clearly not something that the female bodhisattva could compare to. Not to mention anything else in the file, just 2 phrases were enough to make people afraid. Banished Immortal. Heavenly King Dharmakaya. Su Fengnian indeed did not have the confidence to leave this person behind and continue forward. But this did not mean that if Su Fengnian fought without restraint, he would not have a chance to kill him. Su Fengnian took a deep breath, his left thumb gently pressing the hilt of his saber, saying in a low voice, "As you wish." Chapter 1308. It was snowing. It really was snowing. Chen Shiliang, who had risen to the top of the Bailiang bureaucracy as a scholar of the Jiangnan Han clan, stood shoulder to shoulder with the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou. Together, they gazed at the sky that was white from the snow. Compared to the tall and majestic city walls of the Central Plains, the short outer walls of Qingsang City were comical and laughable. This isolated city was located on the northwest frontier fortress. It was like a delicate woman pushed to the shore of a flooded river, ready to be killed by a wave at any moment. Chen Shiliang reached out to catch the snowflakes that were still sparse and thin. He murmured, "In Great Peace City, those who withdraw from court in the snow are nobles and marquises." Yang Guangdou nodded and smiled. "Yes, we are not the same here. The snow covers the bows and knives, and the armor and heavy knives are heavier. However, the boorish people here can't say anything about nobles and marquises. At most, they can say something about a black hole at the mouth of a well." Chen Shiliang smiled slightly and asked, "I once heard this story in Gangnam-do. It seems to have something to do with the great general." Yang Guangdou rubbed his hands together. When Prince was still young, His Royal Highness, the great general brought his family to Tidehark Lake to admire the snow. In the end, His Royal Highness forced him to write a poem. In his desperation, how could the great general write a poem? After scratching his head for a long time, the great general actually managed to come up with one. If I remember correctly, the entire poem was about snowflakes as big as fists and a black hole at the mouth of a well. A yellow dog in white clothes, a white dog. Chen Shiliang smiled and asked, "And then?" Yang Guangdou said helplessly, "The great general clearly couldn't continue. At the time, His Royal Highness chased after him for a long time. However, this absurd scene was often seen on Mount Qingliang. Everyone in the Wang Fu has long gotten used to it." At this point, Yang Guangdou felt a little sad. His voice was hoarse as he said softly, "At that time, the great general's legs were still very nimble. When he ran for his life, he ran as if he was flying." Chen Shiliang exhaled and said with a smile, "Of all the Royal Highness in Liyang, only Bailiang dares to be so disgraceful." Yang Guangdou smiled and said, "Isn't that so?" Liu Fan hurriedly walked up to the top of the city wall. As the deputy general of the Longxiang army, he was indeed as unruly and difficult to tame as the rumors said. After entering Lu province, he had never stepped into the provincial governor's mansion, but today, he actually took the initiative to meet the provincial governor, shocking the guards on the city wall. A while ago, the Longxiang army had disobeyed the orders of the governor-general house and split up their troops to attack. Both the military and the government of Liuzhou were already showing signs of hostility. Yang Guangdou turned to look at Liu Fan and said with a smile, "Oh, rare guest, rare guest. Does Deputy General Li also have the elegance to climb high and admire the snow?" Liu Fan frowned but didn't take offense to the provincial governor's mockery. He said in a deep voice, "I don't know the details of the purple energy phenomenon and the arrows piercing through the air, so I won't talk about it. However, just now, the crossbowmen on the front lines reported that Gu Dongtan and Lu Gui's camp had urgently mobilized 3 cavalry units, all of them rushing toward Linyao City. Among them, Huyan Kichin and Yelu Zongtang's 2 great generals each led 500 light cavalry units. Lu Gui's trusted aide Lin Fu even led the Lu family army's 10,000 main cavalry units. There were even 200 heavy cavalry units hidden among them, ready to charge into battle at any time." Yang Guangdou's expression was grave. he asked. They're rushing toward your Longxiang army's commander. Liu Fan grunted and rubbed his chin. His eyes were sinister. It seems that the Chang cavalry unit that came between Qingcang and Linyao City was bait. Yang Guangdou was furious when he heard this. He couldn't help but say that if he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have spoken so angrily in the beginning. Chen Shiliang, who didn't have a high rank and was temporarily an advisor to the provincial governor, pulled on Yang Guangdou's sleeve and walked forward. He calmly asked, "Generally, let's assume that the young prince's Longxiang army is already facing the 10,000 Chang cavalry. If the Chang cavalry evades the vanguard and intentionally lures the enemy in, will the dragon elephant cavalry be successful in their pursuit?" Liu Fan sneered. "As long as they're caught by our Longxiang army, unless the Chang cavalry choose to turn tail and run, they'll definitely be wiped out in less than 2 hours. Liu Fan reached out and pressed against the wall. "What I'm afraid of now is that the Chang cavalry, who are best at running in circles, will blindly avoid battle and allow them to hold out until they meet up with Lin Fu's army." Liu Fan turned to look at Yang Guangdou, who was nominally the most powerful official in Liuzhou. This general entered the city not to ask for battle, but to say hello. This general will split 10,000 of the Longxiang army to follow Lin Fu. If the army that Lu Gui left at Gudong Beach takes the opportunity to move south, I will personally lead the remaining 10,000 dragon elephant cavalry to resist the enemy. Qingcang City will not be lost. Yang Guangdou finally couldn't hold back his anger. The war is about to begin. You dare to divide your forces when you're at a disadvantage and keep on dividing. Liu Fan, to think that you were a general that the general thought highly of when he was alive. I, Yang Guangdou, am a layman who hasn't read many military books. Even I know that this is a taboo. The importance of Flo Province lies not only in the fact that our side is defending Azure City to the death to restrain Lu Gui's army, but also in the fact that the 30,000 Dragon Elephant cavalry is maintaining a posture of being ready to pull back but not unleash it, so as to form a deterrent force to the entire northern Mang southern dynasty. Neither of these two factors can be missing. If either of them is missing, then Liang Mang would have already lost the first great battle. Even if your Dragon Elephant cavalry is exchanging 1 for 2, even if you, Li Mofan, have accumulated countless battle achievements, Northern Liang King will still cut off your head. You, Liu Fan, deserve to die. Liu Fan's expression was cold as he said stiffly, Provincial Governor Yang, this general has said that Qingcang City will not be lost. Even if we take a step back and say that the 10,000 Dragon Elephant cavalry are all gone, as long as the general and Wang Lingbao can return to the vicinity of Qingcang City, Lu Gui will still have to be a coward. Right now, the most important thing is to ensure that the general of the Longxiang army will not meet with any accidents on the battlefield to the east of Linyao. Yang Guangdou took a step forward. Surnamed Li. The king of Beiliang has promised that I, Yang Guangdou, can do whatever I want in Liuzhou. Do you really think that I don't dare to act first and report later? Liu Fan's face was full of undisguised disdain. He tilted his head slightly and pointed at his neck. Why don't you come and try? Old man Yang, with your little ability, do you think you can chop off my head? Chen Shiliang didn't act as a peacemaker, only looking towards Gu Dongtan's side. He slowly said, Provincial Governor Sir and generally aren't wrong. It's just that matters have their priorities. Right now, we might as well plan for the worst. The appearance of the Chang cavalry was a trap set up by Northern Mang from the start. Now, since our Dragon Elephant army has already taken the bait, moreover, what Northern Mang wants to eat isn't just a few thousand Dragon Elephant army soldiers, but an even more important target, Commander-in-Chief Su Longxiang. In that case, I feel that the Northern Mang Southern Dynasty will definitely activate a relatively sinister backup plan. Who knows, it might even be a small group of Northern Mang's most outstanding martial experts. At the very least, they would be able to fight against the young prince. If Beimang succeeds, this loss will be unbearable for Qingcang City, all of Liuzhou, and even all of Beimang. Chen Shiliang continued, since it's like this, I feel that mobilizing 10,000 Longxiang army is not too much. It's not enough. We also need to add all the crossbowmen we can use, as well as the white horse soldiers in the city. If possible, even the loyalists and spies hidden in Qingcang City should rush out of the city. Liu Fan nodded. Yang Guangdou also remained silent. Chen Shiliang turned his head and looked at Liu Fan. Generally, I don't want you to make any military pledge, nor do I want to hear some grand speech about being defeated. Right now, I only want to ask you one thing. You only have 10,000 dragon elephant cavalry. Once Lu Gui's army resolutely charges south, can you guarantee that Qingcang City will last until the 20,000 Longxiang army returns? Liu Fan's eyes were abnormally resolute. He said in a low voice, I can. Liu Fan smiled. He patted the Beiliang war blade at his waist and pointed outside the city with his other hand. Chen Shiliang, it's fine if you don't trust me, Liu Fan, but please trust this cold blade of mine. If one isn't enough, there are 10,000 outside the city. Chen Shiliang nodded. Liu Fan turned around and strode away. Chen Shiliang suddenly turned to the back of this Beiliang frontier army general and said, Generally, the Longxiang army soldiers are Beiliang people, and so are the people of Liuzhou. I never thought so before, but from now on, I will remember it. After saying this, the general with his back to the two civil officials suddenly raised his hand and gave a thumbs up. Chapter 1309. Most of Huang Qing's sword, 16 Buddhas. Calming disturbance returned to its scabbard and Huang Qing held the sword in a reverse grip. A bloody hole appeared on the young man who was hit in the chest by the end of the scabbard. Although his bones were not exposed, his heart and lungs had been injured by the sword qi. Even Huang Qing, whose qi was as long as a river, needed to breathe in and out several times to calm the crazy and chaotic qi in his body after using this move. All moves in the martial Dao emphasized upon opening acupoints in one go, and they pursued the realm of advancing courageously with the guidance of one's will. But Huang Qing's 16 views were extremely strange. After the qi was formed in one go, it forcefully closed the door at the 16 acupoints, causing the torrent of qi to strike the dam 16 times in succession, and it relied on this to achieve momentum. 16 views, one view and one pause, in line with the Buddhist scriptures, one step one lotus. Although the sword succeeded, Huang Qing still had some regrets in his heart. It was said that the king of Beiliang spared no effort to help Su Longxiang, his younger brother, recreate a red talisman armor. Huang Qing hoped that the young man who was fighting against him would wear the armor that was said to be as solid as a city. Suddenly, Huang Qing, who was known for his heart as still as water in Beimang, laughed at an inappropriate time because the scene in front of him made him feel even more absurd. The young man lowered his head and looked at his chest, then raised his head to stare at Huang Qing. He opened his mouth, only to see a stream of green light lingering between his teeth. That was the heterogeneous sword qi that Huang Qing had planted in the young man's heart and lungs. Not only did the young man not take the opportunity to spit it out to reduce his injuries, he swallowed the sword qi back. I'm not full, do you have more? Huang Qing clenched the famous sword in his hand and smiled. I don't have anything else, but I have plenty of sword qi. Su Longxiang, whose eyes were glowing with gold, turned his head and looked back. It was unknown whether he was looking at Qingcang or Liangzhou. The young man turned his head and twisted his neck. All the joints in his body made a series of ear-piercing sounds like soybeans exploding. He raised his fists and then stomped down with a loud bang. Huang Qing, who was rapidly accumulating power in the dark, narrowed his eyes. He saw qi ji condense like rainbows continuously surging out from the young man's body, shattering and dispersing. Huang Qing, who was only one step away from Dong Tai in the way of the sword, felt incredulous. Qi dispersing on his own. The young man was already at the threshold of the mysterious Finger Realm, but now, he fell all the way back to the Vajra realm. The old celestial master of Mount Longhu, Zhao Shituan, had once taught this disciple the great dream of the spring and autumn annals. This was no secret in the celestial master residence. Those imperial officials and nobles of the imperial family all mistakenly believed that the old man had lost his mind and acted as an accomplice to a villain, helping Su Rintu's youngest son advance a step further on the martial path. In fact, it was true that Zhao Shituan was thinking for his beloved disciple Su Longxiang out of selfishness. However, no one in the world would be able to guess the true meaning of the dream of spring and autumn. It was not to increase Su Longxiang's strength, but to suppress Yanxing in Taoism. If Zhao Shituan did not painstakingly create a box to hide the jade for his disciple, then Su Longxiang would be envied by the heavens. Wasn't Su Fingnian forging the talisman armor for Su Longxiang the same? Previously, the young man seemed like a trapped beast at the end of its rope in Huang Qing's magnificent sword fight. In fact, the talisman armor and the great dream of spring and autumn annals were the true trapped beast. Huang Qing looked down at the calm disturbance as if he was facing a great enemy. Finally, he could deliver a complete sword. Su Longxiang also lowered his head and smiled foolishly. "Brother, I'm going to fight." There was a light snow in Jiangnan. Day after day, Mount Hui was crowded with people. Not to mention a light snow, even if there was a heavy snow, the road would have been trampled clean by people without the need for the Xianyuan family to sweep the snow. The tourists who crowded shoulder to shoulder were all here to admire the moonless restaurant on the Great Snow Plateau. Although Yuni Jiang was not qualified to enter, he could still come in high spirits after seeing it from afar. When he went back, he could boast to his friends in Jianghu. Seeing a woman in purple, he dared to boast that he had seen the female chief of Wulin. However, which female hero did not have a set of purple clothes in her bag when she traveled Jianghu? Otherwise, how could she have the face to call herself a fairy? A while ago, the Wulin assembly was held and everyone participated in the grand event. Everyone added fuel to the fire, which made the reputation of the purple dress of Mount Hui even higher. In particular, the Tide Listening Pavilion in Beiliang sent so many boxes of martial arts manuals from thousands of miles away. It was no doubt that the most powerful person in the world recognized Xianyuan Qingfeng as the chief. Who dared to say anything? Moreover, the woman was so generous. She wantonly gave away the old manuals on the Great Snow Plateau as if she was giving out a few copper coins. Many old and wise Jianghu legends smiled brightly. The liveliness of Mount Hui made Mount Longhu even more deserted. In addition, the incense on Mount Wudang in the distance was getting stronger and Prince Qingqing, surnamed Wu, was in charge of the affairs of the Taoist sect in the mansion of Taoist Master. If it were not for Mr. White Lotus, Mount Longhu would have been very cold this winter. The weather was not cold, but the heart was cold. Fortunately, all this was good for the old Taoist in the small Taoist temple at the foot of Mount Longhu who liked peace. Chapter 13:10. The old Taoist with the surname Zhao had always been an unreasonable weirdo. He was a direct descendant of the Taoist master's residence and was brimming with talent. He could debate Taoism with Qi Xuanjun, compete with Li Chungang in swordsmanship, and compete with Xianyuan Pan in strength. His talent was clearly a level higher than that of the Dragon Tiger Mountain's leader, Ao Shi, who had already ascended. However, in order to avoid being an honorable minister, he fled from the mountain and concealed his identity to wander the Jianghu. After returning to the mountain, he didn't live in the Taoist master's residence. Instead, he lived in the dilapidated Taoist temple at the foot of the mountain and waited for death. A few years ago, he risked universal condemnation and accepted Ren Tu's youngest son as his disciple. If not for the fact that Dragon Tiger Mountain's position as the ancestral court of Taoism was still unshakable, everyone in the imperial court would have drowned this muddle-headed old Taoist. Zhao Shituan wandered around the temple that had finally been repaired. He went to the Green Dragon stream and stared blankly for a while. He seemed to have remembered something and ran to tighten the rope of the bamboo raft. Then, he squatted down and looked at the stream. It was very bleak. After getting up, he shook his robe and returned to the temple. He went to the boy's room and sat by the bed for a while. After sitting for a long time, he still didn't know what to do. He really had nothing to do, so he went to sit by the well. He once lied to his disciple that the well led to Bailiang and was connected to his home. In the end, this idiot would throw hawthorns into the well every time there were hawthorns to pick. He couldn't bear to eat them and gave them to his older brother. As her master, even if he wanted to steal a few to try, it would be absolutely impossible. Zhao Shituan sat by the well and was lost in thought. Of course, the old Taoist didn't like Ren Tu, who almost trampled Dragon Tiger Mountain, but this didn't stop him from liking Ren Tu's two sons. His disciple, Huang Man, was not much different from the old Taoist master's son in his later years. His impression of His Royal Highness had never been bad. The first time he went to Bailiang Palace, he fought with that cunning little fox. It was very interesting, but he didn't hate her. What he really liked was when the young crown prince came to Mount Longhu and bowed to him solemnly. In this world, there was a great number of aristocratic families, and there was no shortage of daughters of aristocratic families. The more successful a person's life was, the harder it was for them to feel guilty and grateful. They would never be willing to say sorry or thank someone. Compared to casually throwing away 1,000 pieces of gold, the former was much more difficult. Weren't the juniors of the Celestial Master Mansion on the mountain the same? Relying on the height that his parents had earned, he had lived on the mountain since he was young. How could he know how difficult it was to make a living at the foot of the mountain? Little did they know that all the high positions, including that dragon throne, and every ancestor who founded the family business, were all bumpkins without exception. The old Taoist sighed. All of a sudden, the old man's eyelids began to tremble, and his heart trembled violently. The old man's expression changed greatly. He quickly pinched his fingers, and his face became paler and paler. He suddenly got up and sat back down. Zhao Shituan, who was deceiving himself, shouted angrily at the well, "Su Fengnian, if you can't protect Huang Man this time, I'll curse in front of your house for as long as I can live in this life." The old Taoist cursed and laughed inexplicably. In his laughter, there was some sadness of not being able to reach the top in his life and letting down his ancestors' expectations, and also some inexplicable open-mindedness. Zhao Shituan slowly stood up and walked to his house. In the west capital of the southern dynasties, there was a small hidden building with a huge vat in which a flood dragon hibernated. The hermits in the building, who were used to seeing the most bizarre things in the world, were in an uproar. Soon, the old woman and the royal preceptor of Beimang were alerted and rushed to the small building. In the old woman's sight, in the position of the Bailiang territory in the vat, the surface of the water that was as flat as a mirror, seemed to have been cut by a sharp weapon for a long time. After the initial shock, the old woman's lips curled into a sneer. Catching 2 fish with 1 hook. The old woman stared at the surface of the water and asked softly, "Other than the sword chi and the copper man grandmaster, can you transfer some experts over? Those who are slightly weaker can also do it." The Imperial Order of Peace shook his head and said regretfully, "Impossible. Hong Jingyan, who is the closest, can't make it in time. As for those who are weaker, it's useless even if 10 or 20 of them go. Besides, the southern dynasty's border can't be transferred. Most of them are already by the king of the southern courtyard." The old woman asked, "Is there a possibility of going for wool and coming home shorn?" The Imperial Order of Peace said indifferently, "It's very difficult for the copper man to completely stop Su Fengnian. However, it shouldn't be difficult to delay his footsteps and buy time for Huang Qing to force Su Longxiang to suffer the wrath of heaven. All the Qi refinement warriors of the southern dynasties are ready. When the time comes, they will add fuel to the fire." The old woman nodded. That was enough. The old woman suddenly took a step back, but quickly took that step back. In the vat, something broke the surface of the water. The dragon raises its head. It stared at that line. He saw Jiangnan and snow again. An old Taoist began to climb the mountain and walk towards the celestial master residence. The old man found a yellow-purple Taoist robe that he had not worn for too many years from the bottom of the box. He even combed his hair and beard, causing countless juniors of the celestial master residence to look at him as if they had seen a ghost in broad daylight. The old Taoist walked towards the ancestral hall and bowed to all the portraits of the ancestral masters hanging on the wall. After walking out of the ancestral hall, this old Taoist of the Hope generation of Mount Longhu arrived at the top of the mountain. In the wind and snow, the old man sat cross-legged and laughed softly. It said that there's a knife on the battlefield and there's no need to be afraid of dying on the back of a horse. There's wine in the pugilistic world and there's no need to be afraid of dying drunk. I've never dared to kill anyone. I can't even drink enough wine. I've never lived a heroic life. In the end, I'm going to die like this. The old Taoist seemed to be talking to the world as he said loudly, "Enjoy yourself." The old man stretched out his finger and pierced his eyes. Then, the yellow-purple Taoist raised his right index finger that was dripping with blood and drew a mark between his eyebrows. It was like opening the heavenly eye. The old man lowered his arms and gently placed them on his knees. He formed a seal and said peacefully, "Huang Man, this is all I can do. I can't learn how to open the heavenly gate. I can't even open the heavenly eye. If I still can't block the heavenly tribulation for you, don't blame me." The world envied longevity, and Taoists cultivated tranquility. At the last moment of his life, the old man remembered his disciples snoring in the Taoist temple at the foot of the mountain a few years ago. It wasn't tranquil at all, but it was what the old man missed the most. At the end of winter in the first year of Xiangfu, the purple gold lotus at the highest point in the pond in the celestial master residence had withered. Chapter 13:11. Su Longxiang began to sprint. His speed was much faster than Huang Qing's. The Taoist's supernatural power of shrinking the ground into an inch could not be compared at all. In the Taoist classics, there was a way to complement the immortals. Of course, it was a way to fool the villagers. However, Huang Qing's sword qi had already permeated the surroundings and was everywhere. It was somewhat like a weapon made of grass and trees. More importantly, with the help of the mysterious finger realm, which was able to see ahead of time, Huang Qing could accurately capture Su Longxiang's attacking route. Before Su Longxiang collided with him in the calm storm, he would inevitably attack those tiny sword qi that filled the world. This allowed Huang Qing to predict the future and plan before acting. Huang Qing had anticipated that Su Longxiang would circle around and attack him from behind. He didn't turn around. Instead, he pulled his sword out of its sheath by an inch. At the same time, a sword rainbow suddenly exploded 20 feet behind him, splitting the sky. However, the expected scene did not appear. Su Longxiang did not arrive as expected, so Huang Qing's first strike had lost its meaning. What was worse was that Huang Qing had already begun to set up a follow-up attack for the youth to knock away the sword qi green rainbow after making the first move. In a battle of life and death between top martial arts grandmasters, the slightest difference was enough to make a difference of 1,000 miles. As expected, Su Longxiang, who deliberately paused for a moment, finally appeared beside Huang Qing like a ghost and then collided with him. Huang Qing's qi that was flowing like a waterfall was forcibly shifted to several major acupoints and flowed like a river. Although the calm storm did not have time to be unsheathed, Huang Qing held the sheath in his hand and swept out. A sword aura drew an arc and split the world in a fan shape with a majestic momentum. In the world of martial arts, only speed was invincible. Su Longxiang did not retreat to avoid the sword aura. Instead, he lowered his head and bent his waist with terrifying speed and continued to rush forward. With a fierce shoulder strike, he directly knocked Huang Qing far away. Su Longxiang ran straight on the ground. Almost instantly, he reached out and grabbed Huang Qing's ankle and pulled down hard. Not only did he pull Huang Qing's body to the ground, but he also directly tore apart Huang Qing's qi that was just about to circulate. Huang Qing crashed into the ground and Su Longxiang kicked him fiercely. Huang Qing had no choice but to use his arm to block the kick, and his body was kicked into the air again. In the blink of an eye, Su Longxiang, who had leaped up, elbowed him in the chest and sent him back to the ground. The shadow above his head pressed down. Su Longxiang crossed his 10 fingers and clenched them into a fist. If this fist landed squarely on him, not to mention the sword qi that was close to yellow, perhaps even the Murong cauldron that was indestructible would become a broken cauldron. Huang Qing's back hit the ground, facing the rapidly falling Su Longxiang from the sky. The hilt of Calm Wind sword was pressed against the sand, and the scabbard was pointed at the sky, pointing directly at the unforgiving and deranged youth. He left his sword in its scabbard. The scabbard stabbed towards Su Longxiang. The famous sword Calm the Storm was unsheathed for the first time in this way. Su Longxiang's fist smashed onto the scabbard, knocking it to the side. His body only paused for a moment, and then he continued to smash downwards. Huang Qing's left hand gently patted the ground, and his body suddenly spun, driving his right hand to swing out a circle of resplendent circular sword intent. It was like a bright moon born in a desert of yellow sand. Although it was a hurried sword attack, and the momentum was far from its peak, Calm the Storm was still extremely shocking once it was unleashed. Unfortunately, it was just like the old saying, virtue is 1 foot tall, and the devil is 10 feet tall. Su Longxiang did not weigh the pros and cons at all, and directly smashed the full moon sword intent with his fist. What did it mean to be irresistible? Su Longxiang was it. Huang Qing hurriedly pointed the tip of his sword, and his body floated out more than 100 feet. Su Longxiang's fist smashed into the ground, and the loud explosion went deep into the ground. Huang Qing stood in the distance, holding his sword tightly, and raised his arm to the same height as his shoulder. A trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. The long sword in his hand not only did not emit sword qi, but also madly absorbed the surrounding green fog like an immortal eating clouds and drinking dew. As the Calm the Storm was completely unsheathed, and especially after it made a whale-like motion, the sword qi that was originally invisible to the naked eye quickly condensed around Huang Qing and Su Longxiang, like fireflies in the summer night sky, and flew into the tip of the long sword. Huang Qing's name was that the sword qi was close. What was sword qi close? It was saying that before Huang Qing arrived and his sword was out, the sword qi was already like, the sky is overcast and the sky is about to rain, and the flock of birds is blocking the road, fine and undetectable, and densely packed, filling the world. Huang Qing held the sword in one hand, and the other hand behind his back. He raised his head to look at the sky where some dark clouds were floating over, and then retracted his gaze to look at the young man who was slowly standing up in the pit. Huang Qing said softly, "People live for a lifetime, and every step they take leaves a trace in the world. It's just that most people's footsteps leave no trace. The wind blows the yellow sand, the snow covers the path, and the water rushes the stone steps. I, Huang Qing, am no exception, but the sword in my hand is different." With every word Huang Qing said, a Calm the Storm was stacked near the long sword in his hand, up, down, left, and right. Layer upon layer, motionless like a mountain. Soon, nearly 300 identical, Calm the Storm, were stacked in front of him. Chapter 13:12. Su Longxiang could no longer see Huang Qing's figure, but he could vaguely hear the voice of the Beimang's #1 swordsman. There have been 2 generations of swordsmen in Jianghu in the past 100 years. Li Chungang is known for his high-spirited spirit. His sword opened the gate of heaven, and he summoned the azure dragon with a wave of his sleeve. Dong Tai is known for his swift sword, and his sharpness is the best in the sword forest. Huang Qing doesn't want to walk on their path. The calm storm in his hand only asks for 2 words. Don't move. Between Huang Qing and Su Longxiang, a towering sword mountain appeared. And this sword mountain was still expanding, pushing towards Su Longxiang. Instead of retreating, Su Longxiang advanced. With a single collision, he broke dozens of long swords of different heights that were blocking his way. After he was stopped in his tracks, he pulled with both hands and tore apart dozens of calm disturbance. No matter how Su Longxiang rushed forward and used brute force to break those long swords, in the next moment, there would always be a new sword to replace the original position. The young man who was blocked by the sword mountain and sword wall was obviously angry. He retreated and pulled a distance away from the sword mountain. Only then did he launch a swift and violent charge. With one collision, he smashed no less than 100 calm disturbance swords. His whole body crashed into the sword mountain and sunk into the mountain's belly. But in the next moment, the sword mountain began to grow on its own. Not only did its momentum not weaken, but it also forced the youth to retreat. Even if the youth stepped on the ground and tried to use his shoulders to push the mountain forward, his feet still slid backward step by step. The youth simply used his head to push against the sword wall, and then used his hands to support it. The youth, who was leaning, roared and pushed forward with all his strength. It was like a wooden wall. The whole sword mountain seemed to tremble slightly, buzzing, and the swords hummed like a swarm of mosquitoes. But the sword mountain, whose thickness was stopped and whose height was still overlapping, still pushed forward slowly with its steadily rising momentum. The youth's forehead was already dripping with blood, and his palms were a bloody mess. The boots on his feet were also trampled through. The youth suddenly turned around, opened his arms, and carried the sword mountain with his not broad back. The sword wall finally stopped. In the sky higher than the giant sword mountain, dark clouds covered the sky, and there were faint flashes of lightning and thunder. The young man's pupils gradually shrank until they completely disappeared. Huang Qing said softly, "The birth of you, Su Longxiang, was never a matter of rules. You shouldn't live long in this world. Then I will use the rules to fulfill the rules." Huang Qing drew a circle with the calm disturbance in his hand. It was a simple movement that even a toddler could casually perform, but Huang Qing, whose sword energy was second to none in the world, found it extremely difficult and stagnant. Then, the countless calm storm swords that formed a mountain of swords began to change their formation. Su Longxiang's swords floated in the air around him, behind him, and above his head. It formed a huge semicircle. The tip of each calm the storm sword was pointed at the young man in the middle. Huang Qing looked at the sky from the back of the sword arc. The black clouds were getting thicker and thicker, and the purple lightning that was as thick as a tree was rolling crazily. Huang Qing, whose sword-wielding arm began to tremble, said softly, "Since you seek your own death and are not afraid of attracting the heavenly tribulation, then I will send you on your last journey." This last sword was called Rules. Huang Qing originally wanted to compete with the sword god Dong Tai, and it would be an unprecedented competition of speed in the path of the sword. He didn't expect to use it on Su Longxiang first. Huang Qing suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, which splashed onto the sword. The calm disturbance fell to the ground. The semicircle sword formation that covered the sky and earth exploded with a boom. Huang Qing's face was filled with shock and confusion. In the distance, the young man stood with his back bent, his arms hanging low. The young man's face couldn't be seen. 7 or 8 thick streams of black energy, like evil dragons, wantonly swam around the young man. At this moment, Huang Qing's clothes fluttered without warning. The scene that he caught a glimpse of was even more horrifying to the sword chi cultivator. Grandmaster Copper Man was stabbed in the abdomen by a knife. Just like that, the two people and the knife continued to charge forward together and crashed into a dune. Such a large dune was instantly shattered, and the next dune was still so fragile, like a firecracker in the hands of a child. Huang Qing turned his head and saw that person standing still with the knife in his left hand. Further away, where a dune exploded, Grandmaster Copper Man stood up in the sandstorm, and with him, there was also the majestic Heavenly King Dharma body that was hundreds of feet tall. Could it be that Grandmaster Copper Man didn't even have time to call out his Dharma body after that person attacked? That king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, came just like that. In addition to being shocked, Huang Qing, who caught a glimpse of the strange phenomenon in the sky from the corner of his eye, also breathed a sigh of relief. Even if Su Fengnian came so quickly, it was still too late. The Great Tribulation had arrived. The 7 heavenly thunders were about to fall. One after another, even if you are an immortal on earth, so what? There was a rumbling sound. A bolt of purple heavenly thunder smashed towards Su Longxiang. Su Fengnian ignored Grandmaster Copper Man and the sword energy approaching, and went straight for the rolling heavenly thunder, swinging his knife. It was exactly the same as the azure dragon sleeve of the sheepskin old man back then. It directly shattered that bolt of heavenly thunder. Huang Qing was dumbfounded. Were these two brothers always so unreasonable when they did things? That was the great thunder that symbolized the heavenly tribulation. Did Su Fengnian really want to take on all 7 heavenly thunders alone? Back then, the immortal Qi Xuanzhen withstood the heavenly tribulation on the demon-slaying platform, but he only withstood 6 purple thunders. Su Fengnian stood beside Su Longxiang, reached out and pressed his hand on his brother's head, and said softly, "Huang Man, father is gone, but as long as brother is still here, even if the sky falls, it won't be your turn to carry it." Chapter 13:13. Huang Qing believed that with Su Fengnian's strength, it would not be difficult for him to break through a thunderbolt, but he definitely did not believe that Su Fengnian could take the punishment on behalf of others. This was just like in the imperial court, when the Beimang Empress wanted someone to die in anger. Even if you were Tuoba Bodhisattva with unparalleled martial arts and outstanding military achievements, you could not stop the Empress's decision. This had nothing to do with the level of cultivation, the cycle of heaven had its own rules. However, Huang Qing had no choice but to believe the scene in front of him. This was really beyond the imagination of Beimang's sword aura. After the Bronze Man Grandmaster brought out his majestic Heavenly King Dharma body, his Dharma body was towering, overlooking all living things. His head was level with the black clouds, while his body walked near Huang Qing. The knife in his chest pierced through his body, but there was no blood flowing. This deeply hidden banished immortal calmly explained, this person predicted that Su Longxiang would definitely have a day when he would break through the realm, so he had already foreshadowed it. However, I don't know what kind of secret technique he used to transfer Su Longxiang's fate to himself. This kind of technique is reversed and will only attract more punishment from heaven. Huang Qing was enlightened inside, most likely it was the red armor that saw the light of day again. Otherwise, with Su Longxiang's physique, if he added an armor to increase his battle power, it would be no different from drawing legs on a snake. Originally, I thought it was the Yenxing supernatural power of the Taoist ancestral court Longhu Mountain, which was used to suppress Su Longxiang's advancement. Now it seems that I still underestimated Su Fengnian's scheming. Huang Qing had previously heard that Wudong Mountain's ancestor Lu had the cup emptying the sea technique. If I'm not wrong, that armor is the cup to transfer Su Longxiang's fate. The Bronze Man Grandmaster, whose aura had skyrocketed, thought for a moment and nodded, most likely. This Grandmaster did not expect that the young man would attack with a knife in his left hand, directly knocking him into this battlefield. This knife was not sloppy, and was mixed with a mysterious technique similar to a nameless Taoist who suppressed the demon Lu Songtao 100 years ago. Even the Bronze Man Grandmaster could only retreat again and again, powerless to resist. If Su Fengnian did not choose to take the initiative to draw the knife instead of killing, he might not even be able to summon the Heavenly King Dharma body and summon and die. In the vision of the Bronze Man Grandmaster, that Su Longxiang finally ascended to the celestial realm, with the evil dragon's aura of his whole body, Huang Qing might not be a match. His Dharma might not be able to subdue him. Grandmaster Copper Man said indifferently, Huang Qing, you withdraw for the time being. The heavenly tribulation is about to descend. There's no need for us to be dragged down and destroyed together. Huang Qing said to Huang, of course, he, Huang's, twos, and Huang to say, he. How could he not know whether or not the crazed Su Longxiang could withstand the heavenly tribulation, but if Su Longxiang wanted to free up his hands, it would be more than enough to make Huang Qing suffer. Huang Qing lowered his head to look at the famed sword, calmed the storm, and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. A determined smile appeared on his face as he looked forward, clenching his sword and taking a step forward. Sailing against the current, if you don't advance, you will fall back. Perhaps today is the opportunity for Huang Qing to step into the sword immortal realm. The Bronze Man Grandmaster said softly, my intuition tells me that today's matter will be full of twists and turns. It's good that you don't retreat. Help me keep an eye on those two brothers. I want to add some boiling water to the furnace above my head, completely cutting off Su Longxiang's chance of survival. As the Bronze Man Grandmaster beside Huang Qing slowly raised his hand, the Heavenly King Dharma body that stood tall also raised its arms. It suddenly put its palms together, exploding out rings of golden ripples, lingering in the air. Something seemed to be born in the palm of its hand. Huang Qing held his sword in front of him and began to accumulate power. Another strange scene appeared in the distance. The red threads of Su Fengnian's arm that was pressing on Su Longxiang's head swayed, like thousands of slender red snakes spitting out their tongues, crazily absorbing Su Longxiang's 7 to 8 black flood dragons. Those red threads were once Catman Han Diaoxi's trump card to kill the heavenly phenomenon with the mysterious finger. Now, Su Fengnian was using it to steal his younger brother's heavenly phenomenon realm. The heavenly thunder was like a huge rock rolling through the black silk-like clouds, its momentum even stronger. The thunder rumbled, purple lightning intertwined, and the clouds in the sky seemed to have countless heavenly court immortals shouting angrily. When an ordinary man was angry, blood would splatter 5 steps away. When the Son of Heaven was angry, millions of corpses would fall. So what if the immortals above the 9 heavens were angry? Su Fengnian retracted his hand and gently pushed the immobile Su Longxiang, pushing his younger brother Huang Man, several miles away. Su Fengnian looked at the sky, the purple lightning swam through the clouds, like flood dragons crossing the sea. Su Fengnian held the Beiliang saber in his hand, looked up at the sky, smiled for no reason, and said to himself, Su Shao, don't you think that scene looks like a dragon robe? For the first time, Huang Qing was in awe of one person. It was rumored that Wang Xianji once had the ambition to be the enemy of the world, his grandmaster's bearing far surpassed the other 9 people in the martial arts evaluation. And at this moment, Su Fengnian, facing the heavenly tribulation alone, also had the spirit of a hidden enemy nation. Huang Qing closed his eyes, the memories of his life from when he held and practiced the sword flashed through his mind. This sword chi immortal state of mind was damaged after his rule sword failed to achieve anything, which was equivalent to him failing to achieve anything. But after seeing Su Fengnian standing with his saber, he took the opportunity to touch the threshold of the earth immortal. His shaky realm actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, steadily climbing up. Huang Qing opened his eyes, his expression solemn, just wait for me, Huang Qing, to comprehend a new sword by watching the lightning fall, then I'll use my newly comprehended sword immortal to toast you, King of Beiliang. Lightning and thunder roared, as if a hole had exploded in the sky. The second purple lightning fell with a loud bang. It did not fall directly on Su Fengnian's head, but landed dozens of meters in front of the young King of Beiliang, then turned and shot toward him. Its momentum was like the charge of 10,000 iron cavalry. Su Fengnian slightly squatted, 2 fingers of his right hand closed together, and the tip of the saber in his left hand pointed directly at the purple lightning. Su Fengnian said in a low voice, river breaking. The purple lightning crashed toward him like a monstrous flood, and Su Fengnian cut it with his saber. The purple tide split into two, rushing past Su Fengnian on the left and right, and quickly dissipated between heaven and earth. There seemed to be an immortal in the sky who angrily rebuked, "How dare an ordinary person defy the heavenly Tao?" Then, a third, even thicker, rolling thunder hurriedly descended to the mortal world. Su Fengnian stabbed the cold saber into the ground beside him, building up his momentum. He stepped out, raised his hands, and drew a semicircle. Shaking Kunlun with a raise of hand, he forcibly lifted the purple lightning with a palm. The sky, clouds, and purple lightning stepped down together, and the earth stepped down as well. Su Fengnian stood at the bottom of a pit that was dozens of feet deep. In Huang Qing's eyes, the purple lightning dazzled and exploded, scattering on the ground like a broken water tank. When Su Fengnian picked up the Bailiang saber again and walked out of the huge pit. After the fourth, incomparably magnificent purple lightning broke through the bottom layer of the sea of clouds, it suddenly sputtered into millions of purple lightning bolts no thicker than an arm, chaotically stabbing towards Su Fengnian. The net of heaven has a long arm. Enemies on all sides, thunder in all directions. Compared to the latter half of Huang Qing's, using rules to make a square and circle, sword, it was more than just a level better. Many purple lightning bolts quickly drilled into the ground, and then quickly and violently exploded, encircling and closing in on Su Fengnian inch by inch. It could really be said to be turning heaven and earth upside down. Su Fengnian silently chanted, 6,000 li. At the crucial moment when Su Fengnian was facing off against the fourth heavenly lightning, the 100 feet Dharmakaya behind the bronze man Grandmaster suddenly opened up with his palms joined together. A lively painting scroll appeared in the palms of his hands. There was a Buddha meditating and chanting sutras, and a mischievous stone nodded. There was a Taoist sitting and discussing the Tao, and a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. There was a scholar holding a book in his hand, and a stone tablet in the east. There was a sword immortal riding Qi in the air, playing the sword and singing. There was a divine general riding a horse holding a spear, and his golden armor was resplendent. Although Huang Qing knew that the bronze man Grandmaster was a banished immortal, he did not know that this Grandmaster was actually the immortal who had once guarded the gate for the heavenly Tao. The people in the painting were clearly people who had attained the Tao and ascended hundreds of years ago. At this moment, the black tiger that had been anxiously circling away from the battlefield suddenly squatted down. There was a middle-aged Taoist with an elegant appearance standing beside the black tiger with his hands behind his back, looking at the bronze man Grandmaster's Dharmakaya with a faint smile. In the 800 years of the world, no one was more immortal than him. Chapter 13-14. Huang Qing tried to comprehend the earth fairy's sword by observing the thunder, but this strange Taoist appeared out of nowhere and stopped the process of comprehension. What was even stranger was that even though the comprehension was interrupted, it did not hinder the advancement of the realm at all. Even the speed of the sword intent reaching perfection did not decrease but instead increased. The Taoist crown on the Taoist's head was clearly the Wudong Taoist's Xiaoyao turban, but he wore the Taoist robe of Mount Longhu and a pair of plain hemp shoes. Without moving his feet, he suddenly appeared beside Huang Qing and stood side by side. However, the sword aura was close to Su Fengnian while the Taoist faced the copper man Grandmaster. Huang Qing's heart gave birth to a contradictory thought that even he felt was ridiculous. It was extremely unlikely, but the most likely. This uninvited guest was the immortal who once sat on the demon-slaying platform for 60 years, Qi Xuanjin. He was not the most powerful person in the world, but he was more powerful than the most powerful person in the world. When Huang Qing was young, he met Beimang's grand preceptor Yuan Qingshan by chance. He listened to the secrets of Taoism and commented on the level of the Taoist masters. He said that most of the so-called immortals were just Taoists who left home. Only Wudong sect leader Wang Zhongluo and Mount Longhu's Taoist masters were considered Taoists who lived in the mountains. Although they were in the world, they were free from worldly disturbances and could add spirituality to the mountains and bring blessings to the orthodoxy. Above the two, Mount Longhu had a Taoist named Zhao who lived in seclusion. He stole heaven's secrets and raised an evil dragon. He could be considered a secluded Taoist. For thousands of years, there were many immortals who ascended. Yuan Qingshan only respected two seniors. One was an immortal Taoist who was born several times, and the other was a true Taoist who cultivated to become an immortal but returned from Heaven's Gate, Lu Dongxian. No one doubted that Qi Xuanjun was the reincarnation of Lu Dongxian. Huang Qing also received confirmation from Qilin's Grand Preceptor. As for whether the previous martial arts sect leader Hong Shixiang was also the reincarnation of Lu Dongxian, Wang Qing and Yuan Qingshan did not meet again after that time. As for why Qi Xianshu would appear at this time and place, Wang Qing had some bold guesses. If the rumor that Ancestor Lu had passed through the gate of heaven and returned to the world was true, then it was reasonable for Ancestor Copper Man, the immortal guarding the gate of heaven, to be reduced to a banished immortal. Huang Qing felt somewhat powerless. If Qi Xuanjun were to make a move, even if he could deliver that sword strike, even if Grandmaster Copper Man could completely spread out that magnificent picture scroll, would they still be able to succeed? Qi Xuanjun spoke. There was no sound between heaven and earth, but Huang Qing heard every word. Huang Qing, I am a swordsman. Since we have 3 feet of green swords in our hands, how can we bend our backs to serve the powerful? Hearing good words is like gifting gold, hearing heavy words is like carrying a mountain. Huang Qing could not help but bend his back slightly, and a bitter expression appeared on his face. Bei Meng had been taken in as a favored concubine by His Majesty in Jianghu and had become a force to be reckoned with in the Central Plains. This was the general trend. How could the sword chi of his chess and sword music school contend against it? More importantly, the first time Huang Qing held a sword was in the chess and sword music school. He was greatly indebted to the peace order. Huang Qing slowly straightened his back and calmly said, Zhenren Qi, there are things that I, Huang Qing, can't do, but there are things that I can do. Qi Xuanjun sighed and seemed to be somewhat regretful. In the end, he did not stop Huang Qing from continuing to nurture that sword strike. Grandmaster Copper Man stood at the foot of the Heavenly King's Dharmakaya and angrily shouted, Qi Xuanjun, you are just a wisp of remnant breath. How can you stop me? The burly old man pretended to be angry, and the Dharmakaya also had the Heavenly King's beard and angry eyes. Qi Xuanjun ignored Grandmaster Copper Man's threat and only raised his head to look at the long scroll of celestial beings. The scroll formed a big circle above everyone's head. On this big circle, there were all those amazing people who had attained Tao and ascended to the heavenly gates 700 years ago. Regardless of whether they were from different religions and schools, they were all once the most influential figures in the world. Although they were only the illusions and incarnations of the gods' favored ones, they were able to frighten the land immortals. It was hard to say whether this was unprecedented, but it was destined to be unparalleled in the future. The sky that was originally covered with dark clouds was like adding fuel to the bottom of a cauldron. The boiling water boiled even more, and the several purple thunderbolts that had not yet fallen became more vigorous and thick. Even the purple thunderbolt that had already taken root on the ground suddenly skyrocketed several times. Su Fengnian 6,000 miles, which had already broken through most of the purple thunderbolts, showed signs of danger that it would be difficult to continue. To attain Tao and immortality, every time a thunderbolt fell from the sky, the people on the ground would only have one breath. There was absolutely no possibility of breathing new life. The magnificent sword aura that was produced by the 6,000 miles sword move had previously stretched out and was imposing. It had already cut through 60 to 70% of the blooming purple thunderbolts in one go. However, after the Grandmaster Copper Man's 100 feet Heavenly King Dharma body stirred up the situation, the heaven and earth changed. The furnace boiled and the purple thunderbolts on the ground collided with each other, creating countless lightning sparks that shrouded Su Fengnian. One could only vaguely see that the sword aura that was originally as magnificent as the Guangling River had shrunk into a small stream, flowing around Su Fengnian to resist the purple thunderbolts. The Grand Master Copper Man's voice was as loud as a bell. He sneered and said, "Qi Xuanjin, could it be that you're just bluffing? Why don't you lend a hand to save him?" He took a step forward and his voice became louder. "Qi Xuanjin, are you unable or do you not dare?" Qi Xuanjin's long sleeves fluttered in the wind, and the hair on his temples fluttered gently with the wind. The great spiritual master smiled and said, "You want to ruin my Dao heart with just a gatekeeper?" Qi Xuanjin turned to look at the place where the purple thunderbolts covered the sky and shook his head. "It's only the fourth thunderbolt. Even if you're interfering, there's no need for me to do anything." They had traveled 6,000 miles in the Jianghu together. The journey was long and the Guangling River was long. However, there was a stream outside Liangzhou city that circled around the city. It was small and close. There was once an old man who lacked front teeth and loved drinking yellow wine. He led a horse across the river and never returned home. Surrounded by the thunderbolts, a person laughed loudly and said, "Old Huang, the wind is urgent. Don't pull." The fourth heavenly thunder collapsed in an instant. However, the fifth thunderbolt, which was turning darker and darker in color, fell instantly. Su Fengnian stretched out his hands. The Overlord carries the cauldron. Purple gas poured out crazily, leaking from his fingers and flowing violently to his head and shoulders. Qi Xuanjin retracted his gaze and restrained his smile. Immortals use the earth as a chessboard, a mountain, a city, and a country as chess pieces, and the fate of the world as the arm that holds the chess pieces. They wantonly place their chess pieces and decide the life and death of mortals as they wish. In my opinion, this is against the great Tao. Against the great Tao. After Qi Xuanjin said those words, the immortal scroll of the Heavenly King's Dharma form produced a slight tearing sound. Then, it became more and more intense. The scroll shattered bit by bit, and the immortal incarnations on the painting dissipated one by one. Even a crack appeared between the eyebrows of the Heavenly King's Dharma form, and golden light shot out in all directions. A bloody scar appeared on the forehead of Grandmaster Copper Man, and golden blood flowed all over his face. Qi Xuanjin said coldly, "Today, I'm here to end the feud between you and me in the Heavenly Gate. You won't listen to reason." The great spiritual master put one hand behind his back and pointed with one finger. Grandmaster Copper Man's chest seemed to have been struck by lightning. He flew backward and collided with the Dharma body. The 1,000 feet tall Dharma body also fell on its back. Qi Xuanjin waved his other hand, and Grandmaster Copper Man was suddenly lifted up. Then, he threw him in a direction thousands of miles away. Qi Xuanjin didn't even look at Grandmaster Copper Man, who landed on the Guangling Road in a flash. He sneered and said, "Since you won't listen to my advice, then get lost." Huang Qing, who only wanted to stay still, suddenly moved. He suddenly drew his sword and began to sprint with his sword. He charged straight at Su Fengnian, who was suppressed by the purple lightning. The power of his sword was no less than a bolt of heavenly lightning. Qi Xuanjin didn't stop him. He only sighed. On the way forward, a figure blocked the path of the man and the sword. The newcomer let the sword pass through his chest and punched Huang Qing's head. Huang Qing died on the spot. The corpse with the sword out of his hand fell heavily in the distance. The corpse was bleeding from all 7 orifices. However, this person was determined to use the sword in his hand to suppress the sword qi of Liang Jianghu since he was young. There was no regret or sorrow on his face. The youth with the sword in his chest let out a roar towards the sky. Qi Xuanjin looked at the youth who he should have called brother-in-law in his other life. His eyes were somewhat guilty. He said softly, "The road leads to the sky. Let's go our separate ways. Li Yufu, I'm not as good as you." Just as Huang Qing said, there were things people could do and things they couldn't do in the world. Moreover, Qi Xuanjun was a cultivator in both life and death. Everyone had their own path. Qi Xuanjun could move away some of the obstacles blocking the path, but he couldn't walk it for others. Qi Xuanjun's body was like a cloud fading and the wind blowing. In the end, he turned into ashes. The youth with no pupils and a stiff expression unexpectedly squeezed out a smile for no reason. He looked at the middle-aged Taoist who he had met on the demon execution platform. "Brother-in-law, have a safe journey." Qi Xuanjun smiled knowingly and nodded. A vigorous aura originated from somewhere in the western capital of the southern dynasty. It came from the north to the south and stirred up the situation again. Qi Xuanjun was furious. Before it dissipated, he pressed down with one hand. The hibernation vat in the western capital building suddenly exploded. The building was filled with water. A dragon came out of the water. Qi Xuanjun, who was about to completely dissipate, had a worried expression. He said regretfully, "For the matter of Zhanlong, there will be a time when my strength will be exhausted." Wang Manor grinned and twisted his neck. The youth who had no strength in his hands pulled out the sword self-taught. He used qi to control the sword and pulled out the calm disturbance. He threw the sword high and then used his mouth to bite the sword hilt. Unknowingly, although it was ridiculous, it was still a form of horizontal sword. The youth first looked at his brother in the distance, and finally looked back at Qi Xuanjun. His eyes seemed to say to Qi Xuanjun that he was here, so he could go without worry. After Qi Xuanjun nodded, he looked at the sky. Before he completely disappeared, he seemed to ask the heavens, "Mortals are mortal, and live forever. If it is said that mortals suffer because of love, what joy is there in living forever without love?" Su Longxiang began to run towards the north. He lowered his head, bent his waist, bit the sword, and held the sword horizontally. Chapter 13-15. In the southern part of Chuan, the bamboo sea was blue and the sky was blue. It was late at night, but there was no snow. A group of people strolled in the sea like immortals. A man in white with a jade-like face was dressed in white. However, compared to the traveling scholars in the bamboo sea, he had an indescribable aura of the battlefield. The other man, who was slightly older, had a scholarly aura. He was more in line with the style of a pure scholar. Behind the two of them was a graceful woman. She was the prettiest in Chuan. She was dressed in white with large sleeves. Even her embroidered shoes were white with only light green lotus flowers embroidered on them. It was as if she was deliberately matching the clothes of the man in front of her. She held a slender bamboo branch in her hand. The two people in front of her walked leisurely but not slowly. This made her feel a little powerless. She was slightly panting, but she did not dare to suggest taking a break. She knew that whether it was climbing the mountain or following in the smoke in the future, as long as she stopped, she would never be able to catch up with the stalwart man in front of her. Even if she was Xia, the charming woman who won the Rouge Review consecutively and the mistress of the top sect in Shishu. She could not help but look up at the middle-aged scholar beside the man she admired. Her eyes were filled with sincere respect. She and the latter had the same surname. However, she was from an insignificant side branch of the Xia family. He was from the main branch of the Xia family, one of the top 10 clans in the Central Plains. The Xia family was unfortunately the first to fall in the Spring and Autumn War. At that time, the eldest grandson of the Xia family was called Xia Guining. He was known as the Heavenly Talent. He was skilled in both literature and martial arts. He joined forces with Li Shan across the river to review the Rouge Review. However, as the cavalry of the Su family continued to go south, Xia Guining suddenly disappeared. The Xia family, who had lost its mainstay in a life-and-death situation, died out. After Xia Guining, the two new martial arts review sessions were fortunately able to continue. However, the Rouge Review was a failure and could not convince the public. Soon, no one dared to take over. Later, even Su Weisheng of the Shangyin Academy retreated and gave up the idea. Xia Guining was just one of the many chess pieces that the Xia family hurriedly placed on the chessboard when they were in trouble. When this man from the Xia clan, who had disappeared for 20 years, appeared in Western Shu and assisted Qin Jibao, who was the vassal of Western Shu, Xia felt as if he had fallen into the clouds. The three of them ascended the stairs, the mountain's topography swirled around, the cliffs were as sharp as swords. When they arrived at the top of the mountain, they gazed into the distance at the locking dragon cliff, a panoramic view of the Sea of Bamboo. Thank you, as the master of the Bamboo Sea, for introducing the story of So Long Cliff to the two of them. Pointing at the cliff carvings, he continued, legend has it that in ancient times, an ancestral dragon was buried in Shishu, and this dragon's claws, eyes, and pearls were all stripped away by the Immortals using great supernatural powers. The dragon pearl in its mouth was embedded in this wall. From then on, Shishu's draconic chi was only enough to transform into a flood dragon, not a dragon. Throughout history, there were only flood dragons and no dragons. In history, there was once a martial artist who divided Shishu and tried to break open So Long Cliff, but he soon died suddenly for no reason. For hundreds of years, famous figures of the three sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism all like to inscribe on this wall, each with their own merits. The Immortal cultivation platform that occupies the most central piece of Feng Shui treasured land was inscribed by the great Feng dynasty's Xiao Xing. At the top, the 7 semi-cursive characters were carved by the Taoist saint, Luan with his sword. The smallest characters among the cliff carvings were facing the heart and facing the Buddha, carved by a nameless monk. Strangely, the character heart and heart was the smallest. Later, a Confucian grandmaster, Wang Yuanshan, climbed the mountain on a snowy night and looked at the characters with a candle. When he was in the mood, he took out his sword and chiseled a little bit. This is the origin of today's Wang Yuanshan painted the dragon's eye on a snowy night, comprehended the Tao and became a saint by looking at the characters. Since then, he had entered the realm of Confucian sage and transcended the mortal world. The middle-aged scholar looked at the cliff carvings of famous scholars that covered the mountain wall, as if he was looking at the face of an old man. Man and mountain, guest and host, both were silent. Xia walked to the side of the man in white and asked softly, "General, are there really flood dragons in the world?" King of Shu Qin Jibao said indifferently, "If you see it, then it is. If you don't see it, then it is not." Xia was stunned for a moment. If it was a normal person who said such nonsense, she would definitely take it as a pretentious pretense. But how could the villain too, who had always been a man of few words, be so bored? The middle-aged scholar called Xia Feiyu by the sect master of the Guanyin sect smiled and said, "Actually, it's not just West Shu that has no dragons. There are also Nanzhao to the south of West Shu, Nanjiang where Zhao Bing, the prince of Yanqi, is at, and the Tu Liao ruled by Zhao Sui, the prince of Jiaodong. But flood dragons are everywhere, so it's not surprising." Zhao Huangchao of Dragon Tiger Mountain stole the fate of West Shu and used the number 1 blessed land of Taoism, Earth Lung Mountain, as a cave to raise a black dragon. Beimang absorbed the fate that Hong Jia brought to the north and successfully raised a flood dragon somewhere in Xijing. Xia Feiyu suddenly laughed. Zhao Bing and Nailan Yusi of Nanjiang have been racking their brains over the matter of the dragon and have been playing little tricks. Great Peace City has turned a blind eye to it. Su Shao and Li Shan of Beiliang are too lazy to care about the illusory fate. Instead, they are viewed as a great threat by the imperial court. Xia, can you guess the reason behind this? Xia shook her head. Xia Feiyu turned and glanced at the white-robed Qin Jibao. His tone was playful. 20 years ago, Huang Longsher was the instigator of the prophecy of White Python prospering Qin that was widely spread in Great Peace City. I also added fuel to the fire. At the time, the imperial astronomer quickly found evidence from the dusty ancient records. The black dragon of Earth Lung Mountain came because of this. As for the white python robe that the imperial court gave to Su Fengnian, it was also made by me. Speaking of which, no matter how much everyone, including me, played around with the prophecy, it was just copying the wisdom of others. It is not even worthy of carrying shoes for that Huang Sanjia. Saying this, Xia Feiyu suddenly looked to the north. He narrowed his eyes and made a sound of surprise. His left hand shrunk into his sleeve and quickly calculated. Chen Jibao looked to the north almost at the same time. Only the ignorant Xia Xia was left. She had heard that after entering celestial phenomenon, one would have a chance of attaining the mysterious heaven's perception. Xia Xia had a deep understanding of the four realms of first rank. Celestial phenomenon was a threshold. The difference between celestial phenomenon and finger profound was only second to the difference between first and second ranks. The first grade of Taoism enlightened being was the finger mystic. Many talented Qi watchers, such as Mei from the Guanyin sect, could also comprehend the finger sword. Many martial artists in the first grade of Vajra realm had one or two finger mystic secret techniques as their trump card. Celestial phenomenon was much rarer than finger profound. After entering finger profound, it was rare to be able to go further. However, if one entered celestial phenomenon and became an earth immortal, it was a matter of pushing the boat with the current. Xia Feiyu kept calculating with his fingers in his sleeve. He said softly, before celestial phenomenon, the depth of qi in a martial artist's body is like a well or a pond. Each has its own depth, but it is still a stagnant water. Once a battle of life and death occurs, the water in the well or the pond will be reduced by a fraction. Then, once one enters celestial phenomenon, it will be like the spring god lake, connected to the river. It will be a living water with a source. However, once there is a rainstorm, the river will flood and the lake will be implicated. Celestial phenomenon has its advantages and disadvantages. After resonating with heaven and earth, it is like handing over a travel permit to God. The saints of the three sects don't dare to kill because the rules are the most important in the three sections. As the saying goes, heaven's law is clear. They don't dare to cross the line. Chen Jibao asked, has Beimang made a move? Xia Feiyu nodded and said, it is indeed a big movement. What followed was a long silence, and the middle-aged scholar occasionally spoke. Even if he spoke, his words were concise and comprehensive, making it hard to understand. Xia Feiyu heard about sword aura, banished deity, 7 thunders become 8 thunders, Qi Xianju, dragon tiger purple golden lotus, hibernation vat, and so on. During this period, Xia Feiyu noticed that Chen Jibao's gaze shifted from the west to the east, as if he was admiring a shooting star across the sky. However, she followed his line of sight and saw nothing. As the twilight deepened, Xia Feiyu couldn't hide his fatigue. However, he soon became energetic. He stretched out his left hand and flicked his 5 fingers. He said decisively, great things can be expected. Xia Feiyu looked at the sky and stretched out his arms. He muttered, there are layers of sieves between heaven and earth. It is easy to go up but hard to go down. The banished deity is a fish that slipped through the net. He is also the bait that the celestial being deliberately left behind. The Xia family retreats in order to advance. I, Xia Feiyu, have retreated again and again. Chen Jibao, I helped you absorb the Buddhist fate of the dragon tree monk to make up for your loss of leaving Beiliang. Previously, I even helped Zhao Huangchao raise the dragon Earth Lung Mountain and let you enter the capital as the Minister of War in exchange for the fate of Taoism that he accumulated. Once Chao Zhangqing dies, you will be able to merge the 3 sects into one. Xia Feiyu's face was pale. She lowered her head and didn't even dare to breathe. Chen Jibao was expressionless. Xia Feiyu retracted his hands into his sleeves and said self-mockingly, the saint once said that those who can live long in heaven and earth can live forever because they do not give birth to themselves. Chen Jibao frowned. Who said that there are flood dragons in Western Shu but no dragons? Xia Feiyu turned around and faced the cliff that was said to be locking the dragon. He shook his sleeves and a white bowl appeared in front of him. There were small flood dragons swimming in the bowl like fish. The flood dragons jumped out of the bowl like flying fish. They swam towards the cliff and hid within. Xia Feiyu laughed. Qi Xuanjin has broken the hibernation vat. The battle between the dragon and python is imminent. After tonight, the hidden dragon of southern border will still be difficult to achieve, but there is a true dragon in Western Shu. This is the last chapter for today. The next chapter, Dragon Slaying, is really difficult to write. Chapter 13-16. The woman was sitting on a sand dune. Her sitting posture was as casual as the bold men at the border. She was so tall that she looked majestic even when she was sitting. She witnessed the spectacular scene of someone fighting against the purple thunder of heaven's tribulation by himself. Even though she was the world's top chi cultivator guru, she was still shaken. After she followed the man here, she saw the heavenly king Dharma form of the bronze man grandmaster, Wang Qing's sword chi, and Qi Xuanjin's appearance and eventual disappearance. Regarding the appearance of Qi Xuanjin, she was more aware than anyone else in the world. For cultivators, the word karma was like the common people who were plagued with diseases, which could be cured easily. If Qi Xuanjin, or Ancestor Lu, wanted to continue his cultivation without hindrance, he must have a result, which was to completely settle his grievances with the Ancestor Copper Man, who was a banished immortal. As for why Qi Xuanjin, who was born from one Qi, threw the Ancestor Copper Man into Guangling sect, she guessed that it had something to do with Huang Sanjia. If Huang Sanjia could make up for his mistakes, he might be able to return to heaven. Huang Qing's death at the hands of Su Longxiang, who had brazenly ascended, was unexpected, but within reason. In her opinion, Wang Xianji, who had suppressed the Jianghu for 60 years, was an old man with an unreasonable fist. However, Su Longxiang's talent was not inferior in any way. In fact, Su Longxiang was even more unreasonable than the one in the distance. Even if Huang Qing's aptitude, temperament, and strength were among the top martial artists, it was still too early for him to meet Su Longxiang, who was willing to sacrifice himself to attract the heavenly thunder. It would be more likely for him to become a real sword fairy. Due to Qi Xuanjin's interference, the situation did not favor Beimang. However, it was still difficult to stop the collapse of the Great Tower. The woman in white had a complicated expression. She grabbed 2 handfuls of sand. She hesitated whether she should take action or not. Tantai Pingjing and the 6-jewel Bodhisattva of Mount Lantua were now considered to have boarded Beiliang's pirate ship. They each had their own secret desires. The latter hoped to unify the western regions with the help of the Beiliang cavalry, and even to spread their teachings to the Central Plains without hindrance in the future. Compared to the female Dharmaraja, the Guanyin sect was not so utilitarian. Tantai Pingjing's original intention was nothing more than to mend the sky. The ancestors of the sect had once passed down the 4 words of a prophecy: the sky tilted to the northwest. Later, after her master's painstaking research, she reached the realm of a celestial being. However, she only came up with a vague conclusion that the sky in the northwest broke open and qi flowed backwards into the earth, just like the sea flowed backwards into the rivers. Tantai Pingjing could only take one step at a time. If Beiliang was really the main culprit, then the Guanyin sect, as the current ally of Beiliang, would have no choice but to change sides. However, Tantai Pingjing had never been honest with that person about this secret hidden deep in her heart. It was not that he was unwilling, but that he could not. Tantai Pingjing looked into the distance. The 5th heavenly thunder was about to fall. That person had quickly taken a breath of fresh air and was ready to strike. Before this, he had tried to stop Su Longxiang from heading north. However, he was quickly targeted by the heavenly thunder above his head. He had no time to care about anything else and could not do anything else. There were many helpless things in the world. Undoubtedly, it was not that he was unwilling, but that he could not do anything. Even if he had withstood 4 heavenly thunders, he was no exception. Their hearts were linked and they understood at once. Tantai Pingjing did not receive any reminder, but she already knew what he was thinking. She sighed and no longer hesitated. She raised her arms and her sleeves were like wings. She pressed her fists together and slowly pulled them apart. Yellow sand sprinkled from between her fingers. The yellow sand sprinkled down, each grain distinct and hovering in the air. The waterfall fell from the sky. Its spray was like pearls, its flow was like silk, and its sound was like a zither. The mysterious scene that appeared in front of her was like a work of God. After all, it only happened in a short distance. It was not spectacular, but it was definitely shocking. The Guanyin sect had 2 secret treasures that allowed this sect to suppress the Qi cultivators of the supporting dragon sect in the north. One of them was the land pilgrimage map that almost caused Su Fengnian to fail miserably. The other was the Moonwell heavenly mirror that was becoming more and more unknown. Both of them targeted the Yuxiu Bell spirit between heaven and earth, making it difficult for it to cross the heavenly thunder pool and binding it within the rules. The latter appeared for the first time in hundreds of years. Coincidentally, not long ago, Tantai Pingjing tested Su Longxiang. However, at that time, the Moonwell heavenly mirror was formed by 2 green water droplets falling down in 2 arcs. It was also at that time that someone went against common sense and passed through the Moonwell heavenly mirror. It was like breaking the moon on the sea, causing ripples in the heart of the great master Tantai, who had cultivated Taoism for almost 100 years. Literature seemed to be happy to see the mountains unequal. However, cultivation was the exact opposite. It was most afraid of ups and downs in one's Taoist heart. Tantai Pingjing wanted to calm down the ripples, and even more so, her Taoist heart. This time, she made an exception to help him. She would treat it as repaying the favor of guiding her in her previous life. After that, no matter how the Battle of Liangmang went, she would not owe him anything. She would do everything according to the rules. Tantai Pingjing sat upright. In front of her was the still waterfall made of yellow sand. To be precise, it was another form of the Moonwell heavenly mirror. Her arms suddenly pulled outwards. The heavenly mirror suddenly enlarged and stood upright in front of her. Tantai Pingjing stretched out a finger and gently pushed the mirror surface. The mirror moved horizontally and then disappeared in a flash. More than 300 miles away in the north, the Moonwell heavenly mirror that had expanded countless times slowly appeared. To the south of the mirror, Su Longxiang was running with a sword in his mouth with his head lowered. To the north of the mirror, a huge monster appeared angrily after the hibernating vat was broken by Qi Xian. The young man and the huge monster that should only be embroidered on the dragon robe and python costume should have collided at the place where the mirror appeared. Then, there would be an earth-shaking fight. The huge monster came with clouds and rain. Occasionally, a ferocious head, flying long beard, and a pair of golden eyes could be seen in the clouds and mist. When it sensed the aura of the heavenly mirror in front of it, its huge golden eyes showed a trace of human-like sarcasm. After a short pause, it rushed out of the clouds and rain and hit the mirror directly. Su Fengnian, who had his back to Tantai Pingjing, was relieved. He did not turn around but nodded gently. This subtle action was already the greatest gratitude to this Qi trainer guru for doing her best. Tantai Pingjing looked at the lonely back with purple thunder hanging over his head. Tears blurred her eyes for no reason. There was once a man with white hair standing by the Guangling River. He said that in this life and the next life, he would like to know all the good people in the world, read all the good books in the world, and see all the good mountains and rivers in the world. No matter how good the scenery in the sky was, he would never envy it. After Tantai Pingjing mobilized so many people to take out the important weapon of the sect, she looked a little dejected and sat on the sand dune in a daze. For Su Fingnian, who was fighting against the heaven's punishment, this was definitely not a measure of timely help. It was one disaster after another.